Alright everyone, I just want to welcome y'all to the full story series. This will be a compilation of all of the projects on the channel that have been completed thus far. So that way, any of our new viewers that join us can watch all of them in one solid video. Anyway, I hope you enjoy. Team Rocket, a criminal organization in the world of Pokemon that has a very far reach. And they are led by one of the world's most powerful trainers, Giovanni. Engineering anything from basic Pokemon theft, which is where the subject of today's video comes in. Jessie and James and Meowth, these three, possibly the three worst anti-heroes in the history of any medium. But wait, Ronan, why are you calling them anti-heroes? That's simple. Even though they work for one of the Pokemon world's most evil organizations, they do tend to do things their own way. Giovanni is cruel and calculating and will do anything to get what he wants. But Jessie, James, and Meowth, well, they do tend to do things that can be considered illegal. But they still have boundaries and morals that they won't cross. Yes, they do try to steal Pikachu and other Pokemon from time to time. But this, I think, is more out of a want of belonging. Jessie and James and Meowth all had a pretty poor childhood. Yes, Meowth too. He was a kid at one point. He grew up on the streets. Watch the episode when they went to Hollywood. That's no longer canon because Unova is now a region. Anyway, when they made it into Team Rocket, they finally felt a sense of longing that they had been searching for, with Team Rocket being their new family, and Giovanni being a father figure to them. They then proceeded to travel across 2 regions and a chain of islands in the name of their new family. But in Gen 3, we see Ash head to the Hoenn region in search of his next challenge. And in tow is none other than Jessie, James, and Meowth. And in this season, in the main timeline, it's pretty much the same as the last 2 regions. They try and fail multiple times to capture Pikachu and other Pokemon, all the while trying to establish a Team Rocket footing in the region, as they had no influence there. But what if, with this newfound freedom, they decided to take a different course of action? Kind of like how a choice in one of the other what ifs, what if Ash won the Indigo League, can change everything. Let's go see how this newfound freedom could affect Jessie, James, and Meowth. Okay, so I think right away in episode 1, let's get the show on the road. We can see this change, this choice being made. Within the first 3 minutes of the episode, we can see Jessie questioning their choices and if it's all worth it. I think this is the dividing point of the timeline. She just continues talking about how they always fail as they arrive in the Hoenn region. They never get Pikachu and they have nothing to show for it. James, being more of the follower that he is, asks what they should do about it. Jessie says she don't know, but this is their chance, as they are the only members of Team Rocket and Hoenn. This is their chance to change, become stronger, to do things for themselves for once, and not for Team Rocket. James thinks deeply about this, but he does eventually agree, as he's tired of getting bested by the twerp. They turn to Meowth, and after some peer pressure, Meowth finally agrees. But secretly, he doesn't like where this is heading. From here, all the events play the same as in the anime until they get to Petalburg City. The events all happen same as in the original, even Ash challenging Norman, but losing to Vigoroth, and Team Rocket attacking the gym to capture all the Pokemon. But they are stopped and sent blasting off, as usual. Ash and May choose to leave, and they head to Rustboro City, Max in tow. But Team Rocket will stay behind. Jessie is upset that they lost so easily, again. They can't even stand up to a gym leader. Then Jessie has a brilliant idea. She asks James, what's the one thing that the twerp always does that they don't? James just looks at her with a blank stare. Jessie yells at James for being dense, then reiterates the gym challenge. James stares at her, even more puzzled. Jessie looks at him, and she thinks, okay, I'm gonna have to break this down. Jessie explains, if they were to take the gym challenge, they could increase the skill to take on the twerp, then capture Pikachu. James is unsure of himself, but agrees. Meowth needs a little bit more convincing, but after agreeing that they will not lose, focus on their priorities of capturing Pokemon, and more importantly, Pikachu, for the boss, Meowth is on board. Jessie says then, let's head back to the Petalburg gym and challenge Norman. Once back at the gym, they lay an open challenge to Norman, and after some scolding about the damage they caused at the gym, he does agree. Jessie is up first. Norman informs her that she needs 3 Pokemon to battle his gym. She is shocked, as she was not available for the conversation when Ash and Norman had it. But thinking quickly, she demands that James let her use Weezing, and he does. The battle goes relatively well for Jessie. She starts with Weezing, but it is quickly knocked out by Slackoth. Then she sends in Arbok, which revenge kills Slackoth. Then Norman sends out Vigoroth. Then, after a bit of back and forth, the two manage to knock each other out. Now, Jessie is down to her last Pokemon, and she was trying to avoid using Wobbuffet, as she has no confidence in it. So she turns to Meowth, and she almost convinces it, but when Norman sends out Slacking, Meowth downright refuses. So, reluctantly, Jessie sends out Wobbuffet. After some flailing on Wobbuffet's part, and a severe annoyance on Slackoth's part, it finally stands up to try and end the battle with a Focus Punch. And out of pure panic, Jessie calls for a counter, which is returned at double the damage, knocking out Slacking. Jessie is stunned, as she didn't think she would win. Up until now, she had doubted her plan. But this now convinces her that she is on the right step. James and Meowth are just as surprised as Jessie is. Jessie then turns to James and asks if he is ready. James reminds Jessie that he only has one Pokemon, Weezing, and she used it. He's gonna have to wait. As a result, the two pack up and head to Rustboro City. This does mean something changes for them. In the episode, A Poached Ego, we see 2 major events. The first one is Jessie and James releasing Arbok and Weezing. The second one is James catching Cacnea. But because they stayed for the gym battle, they missed the poacher, so Ash and his friends just took care of it without the assistance of Team Rocket, resulting in them not releasing Arbok and Weezing. But I still think that James would encounter Cacnea, and after giving it some food, he would catch it. Then we move on to the next episode, A Tale with a Twist. In this episode, we see Jessie capture Seviper. I think that this would still happen, but with the added effect that Arbok and Seviper do not, I repeat, do not get along. Now Jessie has her work cut out for her. Next we head into the taming of the Shroomish. As Ash and everyone has already made their way on, I think that passing through, James would befriend a random Shroomish and catch it. It's in his character, and this season seemed to give him grass type. Every other season did too. So I feel like a grass type like Shroomish would be a good addition to his team. But anyway, this is important, as it now puts both Jessie and James at 3 Pokemon each. But in the very next episode, Jessie catches Wurmple, giving her the advantage in Pokemon count again. Oh well, I guess it really didn't even out, did it? Next on the list, Slateport City. I think that the trio would arrive into the city just as Ash and friends are leaving to go to Dewford Island. They would confront each other. Ash accuses them of trying to steal Pikachu. Jessie just gloats. They have given up on Pikachu in pursuit of more important avenues. Puzzled, Ash asks what they mean. Jessie flashes the balance badge, bragging about how she beat Norman. May and Max accuse her of stealing the badge, but Jessie gets angry and defends herself, stating that she won the badge fair and square, and how they are here to challenge the Rustboro Gym. Meowth is silently concerned. Ash demands that they prove it. Let's go to the gym. Jessie says, alright then, let's go. And they head to the gym. First up in this gym is going to be James. He sends out his newly caught Shroomish after a Stun Spore and a Mega Drain to get back some of the HP. Shroomish beats Geodude. Next up is Nosepass, which does take some time, but eventually it does knock out Shroomish. Now, James has a choice. Does he go with his newly caught Cacnea or Weezing? Ultimately, he decides to go with Cacnea for the type advantage, and after some creative dodging and a few needle arms, Cacnea manages to knock out Nosepass, earning him his first badge. James is now 100% on board with Jessie's plan and celebrates. Being that Roxanne just had a gym battle, she tells Jessie that she will have to wait until the morning for her battle. Jessie is fine with this, so she waits. Convinced somewhat of Team Rocket's new direction, Ash and team think they have seen enough. They choose to leave and they go to the Pokemon Center. Ash tells Jessie and James that they should come and get ready for tomorrow. They jump at the chance for free food and a bed and follow along. But there's only one problem. These services at Pokemon Centers are only free to registered Pokemon trainers. And Jessie and James are not, as they don't have a Pokedex and have never had one. Upon hearing this info, the two start to panic, because this means that they may not be able to continue the gym challenge, as they are supposed to be registered in order to compete in the gym challenge, which could void the badges that Jessie and James have already won. The two are really panicking now. They don't know what to do. But Meowth has an idea. They should call the boss. He can take care of it and get them what they need. The two are at first hesitant, but they eventually make the call. After some convincing on the part of Meowth, Giovanni agrees and says their special Pokédexes will be there by morning. The next morning, after spending the earnings from James's gym battle to cover the cost of their food and rooms for the night, the brand new Pokédexes arrive via overnight mail from the Kanto region, with them as fully registered Pokemon trainers. Ash and friends head their own way. Jessie, James, and Meowth head back to the gym. The trio arrive. Jessie and Roxanne get right into it. First up, it's Geodude versus Seviper. After some clever battling on Roxanne's part, she takes out Seviper. This shakes Jessie. She had developed a bit of a chip on her shoulder as a result of beating Norman. But this rapid loss has brought her back down to earth. She then sends out Arbok. After some thinking, Jessie knows that Arbok is the best bet and leads with a dig, and it connects with Geodude, knocking it out. Roxanne then sends out Nosepass, and after a hard-fought battle, Arbok just barely manages to squeeze out a win over Nosepass, earning Jessie her second badge. Jessie realizes that the gym challenge is harder than she thought, but this makes her even more determined to win all 8 badges. The trio then move on to Dewford Island. They arrive hot on the heels of Ash's loss at the Dewford gym. They witness the final moments of the battle and Ash's defeat, witnessing Brawly's Hariyama evolving. This shakes Jessie a bit, but James, fresh off his victory at the Rustboro gym, wants to go, so he schedules a battle the next morning. The next day, they head to the gym, and after a tense battle between Weezing and Machop that ends in a draw, James chooses Shroomish to battle Hariyama. But the little mushroom isn't enough. Even though it puts up a valiant effort, it gets knocked out with a karate chop. And now, James has been knocked down a few pegs. Jessie chooses to decline a gym battle with Brawly at the moment, stating that she and James need more training to beat him, and the two head off to another part of the island to train. During this time, Jessie and May still have their rivalry of Wurmples. Then, they move on to the Granite Cave. I think we need to even up the count between Jessie and James at this point. After some training and encountering Steven, James befriends a lowly Iron, the outcast of all the Irons in the cave. And after some bonding, it joins the team of James. But the Loudred that tramples Jessie seems to have it out for her. And after a lot of running from it, she chooses to face it and battle it using her Viper. She manages to catch it. So much for evening out the teams. On to the next episode. In the episode Gone Court Fishing, Jessie and James encounter the twerps and witness Ash training and dodging the waves. This inspires the two to take on their own training. They separate themselves from the twerps. Jessie tells James that he needs to remember how Brawly battled. It was smooth, patient, and relaxed. The two set out to mimic Brawly's battling style, and they get to work, training with all of their Pokemon, especially the new ones, Aron and Loudred. During all this time, while Jessie and James have been training, Meowth has been working hard to establish a secret base for Team Rocket. They have established a connection with Giovanni, who is pleased that they have established a secret base. All the while, Jessie's Wurmple has evolved into Cascoon, but she still thinks it's a Silcoon. Team Rocket is told that reinforcements will head their way to the base to establish a foothold on Dewford Island. Team Rocket still has the run-in with Team Plasma and Aqua. The events play out the same, and they chase both teams from the island. Next is the events of Seeing is Believing. Jessie's Cascoon evolves into a Dustox during the training with James. But all this training has some added effects. James's Shroomish evolves as well. Now that both have new Pokemon, they decide to head back to the gym. Ash and friends have already moved on from the island as he has won his second badge. This time, Jessie chooses to go first. She leads with Viper, and after a struggle, it manages to take out Machop with the Poison Tail, but just barely. Then, Hariyama takes out Viper. Jessie chooses to use Dustox next, and with a Stun Spore to slow down Hariyama, the combo of Confusion and Gust, she manages to barely take out Hariyama, earning her third badge. Brawly tells James that he can come back tomorrow to have his battle. The night at the Pokemon Center, James vents his frustrations and fears about facing Brawly. He already lost once. What if he hasn't trained enough? Jessie tells him to stop whining. He will do fine. He needs to be confident, or he will lose again. This seems to be the pep talk James needed. The next day, they head to the gym. This time, James leads with Cacnea, and it is able to beat Machop with a Needle Arm. Hariyama is then sent out, and Cacnea manages to hold its own for a while, causing some damage, but the battle with Machop has tired it out, so it does lose to Hariyama. James then sends out his newly evolved Breloom. After a back and forth between Breloom and Hariyama, a Mach Punch manages to put down the colossal Pokemon, earning James his second badge. But now, the trio has a new problem. They are under direct orders from Giovanni to wait until the troops arrive to take over the base, but Jessie and James are worried that this will end their gym challenge. They are worried that they will be forced to head up the new division of Team Rocket. It has been a week, and Jessie and James are growing impatient. But it hasn't been a total loss, as the two have been passing time with training. All the while, Jessie has been dealing with Arbok and Seviper. Every time the two get near each other, they fight, and it has gotten to the point to where the two have to be fed at different times of the day. But one day, while Jessie is dealing with the two fighting on the beach near the secret base, she hears a familiar voice criticizing her on how she handles her two Pokemon, and that she looks pathetic. James approaches and remarks, "Not you two." Jessie turns, and it's Butch and Cassidy. They were sent to take over the base with a small contingent of rocket grunts. Jessie and James are very upset. They were making such great progress, now just to have it ruined by these two. Cassidy asks Jessie where the base is. Jessie reluctantly points, and they walk towards it. Butch stays outside with James, as he was working with Cacnea and Aron. Butch starts to talk badly about the two Pokemon, and James defends them, stating that they are both strong Pokemon, and they already have 2 badges. Butch just looks at James and laughs. James, confused, asks, "What's so funny?" Butch says the boss had told them about their little endeavor, but he hadn't believed it. He tells James that he's pathetic. Team Rocket doesn't battle for badges, they steal Pokemon to make money. James tries to defend himself by stating that they are using it as cover to establish Team Rocket in Hoenn. And it's working, as now, Butch and Cassidy are here to ride the coattails of Jessie, James, and Meowth's success. This shuts Butch up. Back in the base, Jessie shows Cassidy inside, and she immediately starts to make fun of the base for how small it is and inadequate, just like Jessie and James. Then Meowth chimes in to put Cassidy in her place, saying how this is way more than she has ever done. Cassidy shuts up. Jessie then asks Cassidy what's the next stage of orders from the boss. Cassidy looks at her, puzzled. Then after a moment, starts to laugh. "You mean to tell me that you thought you would be needed for this? You did great work here, I'll give you that. But the boss doesn't trust you or James to handle this type of responsibility. Your orders are simple. You are to move on and establish another base on the mainland as soon as possible. And when you and James do, you are to report back to us, not the boss, because he doesn't want to deal with your incompetence." You see, secretly, Cassidy is loathing Jessie. She wants to take credit for Jessie and James' work going forward, and doesn't want them to gain any more favor with the boss, as he is actually deeply proud of what they've done so far. Jessie doesn't think to question this though, as she is relieved. She doesn't like reporting to Cassidy, but it does still give her the freedom to challenge the gyms, so for now, she accepts it. She tells Meowth that it is time to go, but is stopped by Cassidy, who says she wants to talk to Meowth alone. Jessie doesn't like it, but she leaves as Butch walks in. Jessie and James wait on the beach. Moments later, Meowth appears. Jessie asks what that was about. Meowth blows it off, just saying that she wanted to know about the computer systems and where everything was located. She needed the passwords in the code books, after all. James doesn't buy this explanation, but keeps his worries to himself, then asks what the next step is. Jessie replies, "Our next gym badge, of course," and the trio set off from Dewford Island. The next stop is Slateport City. In this universe, they are behind Ash and friends, who have already been there. But Jessie and James do get caught up with the few members of Team Aqua that were left around. They manage to clear them out, and they report back to Butch and Cassidy that Team Aqua has been active in Slateport City. The two tell them that they need to establish a secret base nearby so that they can send more troops in to monitor the situation. So after spending about a week locating and setting up a new secret base, using Auron to dig through, they manage to set something up underground, and they call to inform Butch and Cassidy that the base is ready, and they give them the location. But this time, they don't wait around, as they choose to move on to Mauville City as quickly as possible. Once they arrive, they head to the gym. This time, James opts to go first. Once they meet up with Watson, James challenges him, and Watson agrees. Watson chooses to send in Voltorb to start, and James chooses to head up with Weezing. The two Pokemon have it out. They exchange sludge attacks with shockwaves, but Weezing manages to take it out. Then, Watson sends in Magneton. James chooses to keep in Weezing, but quickly it turns out that the poison type won't work, and Weezing loses to a Zap Cannon. But James isn't phased. He sends in Breloom. Breloom makes quick work of the Magneton with a Mach Punch. Watson then sends in his Electrike. The battle between Electrike and Breloom gets intense, but the intensity of the battle causes Electrike to evolve into Manectric, and its new power manages to put down Breloom. James then has a choice. He chooses to send in Auron. The battle does come down to the wire, but Auron barely manages to squeeze out a win to earn James his third badge. Watching James's gym battle, Jessie is having second thoughts. That night at the Poke Center, Jessie tells James she wants to skip this gym. James asks why. There are only 8 gyms in Hoenn, so she would have to get this badge in order to compete in the Pokemon League. Jessie says she knows this, but the problem is she saw the battle today. Weezing could not beat Magneton, and Watson has a Magnemite. James says, yeah, what's the problem? Jessie yells at James for being dense. She says that 3 out of 5 of her Pokemon are all poison types. She doesn't feel confident in battling this gym yet, but she will come back to it. So, they should just head on to the next gym. James tries to convince Jessie to change her mind, but she is dead set on this. This does not sit well with James. But the next morning, the trio set out. Once the trio hits Route 14, happen the events of Maxed Out. And in this route, I'm thinking James would have the opportunity to capture a lonely Surskit who is lost and scared, bringing his team to a total of 5. While they're here, they also establish another base and report back to Cassidy and Butch, telling them that now they've established a second base on the mainland just north of Mauville City to send more grunts to manage the base. They do not wait around at this one either. They just leave a location beacon and they head off to their next gym. Before they get to the gym, they're going to hint the events of game winning exist. Here, I think Jessie would come across a Numel coming up the fiery path. This Numel isn't part of the herd that appears in the episode. Jessie decides to add the little guy to her team, as it seems to have developed some infatuation with her. Next, in the events of Going Yon, Jessie, James, and Meowth arrive in Lava Rich Town. And once they get in town at the Pokemon Center, they start hearing all of the talk about Team Magma being up on the volcano. This catches the attention of Meowth. Meowth knows that they have to establish a lookout point here as well. So he tells Jessie and James that while they're challenging the gym, he's going to start looking around for a spot for a potential base. While Meowth is setting up the base, Jessie and James decide to head immediately for the gym. Jessie wants to go first on this one. They meet up with Flannery, and Jessie lays her challenge. The two start the battle. Jessie leads with her new Numel, while Flannery leads with Slugma. Numel is really cold, so it takes a while to get going, but after some help from Slugma and its flamethrowers, it manages to warm up, but it has taken too much damage and is taken out by the Rock Slide of Numel. Jessie gets a little flustered by this, but she decides to send in her newly caught Loudred. It manages to take out the Slugma rather easily. Then, Flannery sends in Macargo, and it goes after Loudred. The two have a bit of back and forth, but Loudred finally manages to take down Macargo. But it has sustained a lot of damage. Flannery sends in her Torkoal, which uses a body slam to take out Loudred. Jessie then thinks a lot about her last option. She decides to go with Seviper. This Viper Pokemon does struggle against Torkoal for a while, but Poison Fang manages to poison it, then a Poison Tail sets it off balance, kinda like Corphish did when it battled it, knocking Torkoal out, earning Jessie her 4th badge. That night, at the Pokemon Center, Jessie tells James he should skip this gym, as it does not favor him in a tight matchup. James looks at Jessie and begins to scold her. She replies, "That's the reason I skipped the Mawile gym, but now I have Numel, so I should have an advantage." James is appalled by Jessie's response. He doesn't care about type advantage. He's here to get stronger, and if he can't deal with a type disadvantage, then he shouldn't be doing this. James is so angry that he chooses to sleep in a different part of the Pokemon Center. The next day, James wakes up before Jessie and Meowth, and he heads to the gym to challenge Flannery by himself. Flannery accepts his challenge, and they get started. James manages to take out Slugma with Surskit, but then when Macargo is sent out, James chooses to send in Aron. Just then, Jessie and Meowth arrive to watch James battle. Jessie sees James is at a disadvantage, but James still does his best to hold off Macargo with Aron. Even though it was tough, Aron manages to take out Macargo with the Metal Claw. Jessie sees this and thinks maybe James has a point. But then Flannery sends in Torkoal, and it manages to take down Aron with a Flamethrower. Then Jessie thinks to herself, "No, I was right. Type disadvantage." James then sends in Weezing. The battle for the two gets off to the slow races, but after a while, James manages to take Torkoal down with an explosion, but this causes both Pokemon to faint. But James still has Surskit, and this makes him the winner, earning him his 4th badge, the Heat Badge. Later at the Pokemon Center, Jessie tries to apologize to James. This is something that is extremely hard for her, and James sees what she's trying to do. She realized that he might be right, and her fear is what's holding her back. James tells Jessie that he is glad she got over her fear, but there is something that they need to talk about. James tells Jessie that he thinks they need to split up for a while, that they should go their own separate ways. Jessie and Meowth look at James in pure shock. James tells them, "Listen, there's a lot on our plates right now, and right now I feel like we're holding each other back. Not just your fear, but we're holding each other back from growing. We're relying on each other too much." James makes a compelling point. "Meowth, you're still working on the base here in Lava Ridge Town," said, "and that is not yet completed." Said, "Jessie, you have to head back to Mawile City to earn the Mawile Gym Badge." Said, "And I still have to head back to Petalburg City to battle Norman." James says, "Right now, our paths head in 3 different directions, and the only way that we can make sure that all 3 of them are completed is if we choose to go the 3 different directions." We pick back up with James stating his case on why they should split up, and after making his argument, Meowth chimes in. Surprisingly, the feline is on board with James's idea. He stated after looking around, he thinks that Mount Chimney would be the perfect place to establish the main base in Hoenn, as it is very hard to access and would be perfect to conceal and cover Team Rocket coming and going. Not to mention that Lava Ridge Town is at the base for much needed supplies. Jessie is taken back by this. She never wanted to split up, and now her attitude is driving a wedge between the team. But she is outvoted 2-1, so ultimately she goes along with it. The next day, Jessie and James head out, while Meowth stays behind. Jessie decides to head back down Route 14 toward Mawile City, while James decides to head through Meteor Falls, back toward Rustboro, then to Petalburg City. Overall, James's route will take the longest, so Jessie decides she will head to the base they set up on Route 14 once she is done in Meowth City, until James makes contact with them and they will meet back up with Meowth in Lava Ridge Town. Jessie arrives in Meowth City and heads straight for the gym. Watson greets her and asks if she is finally ready to have the battle she passed on before. Jessie, a little overconfident now that she has Nummel, says she is, and she plans to take it 3-0. Watson says he likes her spirit, and they head into the gym to get started. Once on the battlefield, Watson sends in Magneton. This is just what Jessie was expecting, so she sends in her new secret weapon, Nummel. But there is a problem. Nummel is asleep. Jessie screams at it to wake up, but it doesn't respond. Watson just stares at Jessie as she loses her mind. Watson tells her if Nummel doesn't wake up, then he will be forced to disqualify it. Jessie freezes. If Nummel doesn't wake up, then she will be at a disadvantage, and she will lose the match. She turns to Nummel again and scolds it some more, but nothing. And Watson makes the call to disqualify it. Jessie recalls it and thinks to herself if she should even go on with the battle. Then Watson tells her, you know, in all my years of being a gym leader, I've seen and fought many battles, in some which people had no chance of winning, but somehow they managed to take it in the end. He tells her, don't give up. She can still win this. Jessie thinks to herself, maybe. After some thought, Watson tells her to make her choice or be disqualified. Jessie chooses and sends in Loudred, and the battle gets underway. Although Jessie puts up a decent fight, Loudred ends up losing to Magneton, putting Jessie down to just one Pokemon. But she opts to keep going. She holds a Pokeball in her hand and thinks to herself, I know you'll be at a disadvantage, but you are my strongest Pokemon. So if anyone can do it, it's you. And Jessie sends in Arbok. The battle comes down to the wire. Arbok does no dig, and it does get some hits in, but it is ultimately not enough, and the two Pokemon end up knocking each other out. Jessie losing the match. Jessie recalls Arbok and turns to leave. Watson stops her. He says he would be glad to have another battle with her when she's trained up some more. Jessie says nothing and leaves. Later, it is at the Pokemon Center. Nurse Joy returns with her Pokemon and asks her if she's alright. Jessie, feeling down since her loss at the gym, and out of pure loneliness, she confesses to Nurse Joy about her frustrations and how she doesn't know what to do, especially about Nummel. Nurse Joy tells Jessie she needs to be patient, as Nummel is still very young. Jessie thinks to herself, she's never raised a young Pokemon before. She doesn't know how to go about it. Nurse Joy tells Jessie to spend some time with it, get to know it, and her other Pokemon. Every Pokemon is different. Then she leaves. Jessie reflects on this, and she thinks what Watson said. Training. Nurse Joy said. Jessie thinks on this, and she thinks about what Watson said about training, and what Nurse Joy said, getting to know her Pokemon. That's just what she's going to do. The next day, Jessie gets to work and heads to the base on Route 14. Now, we shift over to James. He is enjoying his newfound freedom. So much so, that he gets to Fall Arbor Town and he chooses to enter the Pokemon contest to help with his training. He doesn't get very far, only to the first round of battling. But this is important. He was working with his newly caught Surskit, and during the battle in the contest, it evolved into Masquerain. Even though the judges loved this, it still wasn't enough to win the match. But James is happy. He and his Pokemon both got stronger. Then, outside of Fall Arbor Town, James has an encounter with a wild Pokemon. While training with Aron, a wild Zangoose attacks out of nowhere. Aron does his best to hold it back, but it won't stop, and James doesn't know why. Aron does manage to weaken it considerably, and because it won't stop attacking, James makes the choice to catch it, bringing his team to 6. James has now made his way to Petalburg City. James has been on the road for a few weeks, training the whole time, but he is still having problems with Zangoose. It hasn't come around all the way. It has a super aggressive personality, and is proving difficult for James. But he is up for the challenge. James heads to the gym the next day after arriving in Petalburg City to meet with Norman. Once there, Norman greets him and asks if he's back for more problems to destroy the gym or an actual gym battle. James replies, "A battle. Sorry about the previous encounter." So James and Norman head inside. The battle starts. Norman sends in Slackoth. James, expecting this from watching Jessie's battle with him, James decides to match Norman's strategy and sends in Zangoose. The battle starts, and it is clear that Zangoose is over-aggressive towards Slackoth, and as a result, it takes the battle very quick. James is happy about this, but Norman matches the aggression of Zangoose and sends out Vigoroth, and man, the two go at it. To the point that Zangoose stops listening to James and just attacks continuously. James recalls it. Zangoose isn't disqualified, but it needs a cooldown point. James sends in Aron, and the battle with Vigoroth continues, but Vigoroth is more agitated than usual due to the battle with Zangoose, and the intensity of the battle pushes Aron to the edge. This forces its evolution into Lairon. With his newfound power, Lairon is able to match Vigoroth, resulting in a double knockout between the two. James is proud of Lairon, but now he knows what's coming as Norman sends in Slacking. James knows that this is going to be tough, but he knows he can win. James sends in Breloom. James thinks, due to his type advantage, he will be able to take down Slacking, but this false sense of security costs him, and Slacking comes after Breloom with full force, knocking it out. James knows he got overconfident. He checks himself, and he knows he only has one shot. He has to take it. James sends back in Zangoose. It immediately starts to attack Slacking, but gets checked real hard. Not enough to knock it out, but enough to straighten it out. James calls to it, telling Zangoose they will have to work together in order to win. Zangoose looks back and nods. James orders a swords dance. He knows that he needs to end it with one shot, and takes advantage of Slacking's truant ability. Then, Norman orders a focus punch. James takes advantage of Slacking's slow speed and orders Zangoose to use Crush Claw. This connects, and it seems to have added effects on Slacking. It can't move. James takes his opportunity and orders another Crush Claw, which connects with full force, knocking out Slacking and earning James his 5th badge. Later that night, James establishes communication with Meowth. James asks about the base. Meowth says it's coming along great. He's almost done, but they have a major problem. James asks what it is. Meowth says he hasn't heard from Jessie in almost a month. The last time he heard from her was when she lost her first gym badge at the Malval gym. But now, he's lost all contact with her. This worries James. He tells Meowth that he will head to Malval City first thing in the morning. James hangs up the phone with Meowth to get some sleep. James heads out the very next morning. It takes about a week to reach Malval City. During this time, James spent the time working with Zangoose, Lairon, and Masquerain. Zangoose has come around, and James and the rest of his Pokemon now get along with it. Once James reaches Malval City, he heads to the Pokemon Center in search of Jessie. Once he speaks with Nurse Joy, James finds out that Jessie has only been at the Pokemon Center a handful of times in the past month, spending most of her time north of the city, but not knowing what for. James knows, and he heads to the base that they established north of the city. Once he arrives there, he is surprised. James thought there would be some members of Team Rocket out on patrol. The base they established could hold 10 people, so he figured there'd be at least one outside. But there's no one. So James heads inside. The whole place is in disarray. James is worried about Jessie. Thinking something may have happened, he heads outside. He sends out Masquerain and tells it to go look out for Jessie or any signs of her. After a while, it comes back and leads James to a clearing deep in the forest. There is Jessie. She is barking commands at Numel once again, but it just looks at her and then it starts to play. This frustrates Jessie, and she collapses from the frustration. James rushes over to her. She is surprised to see him. Jessie asks James what he's doing here. Did he beat Norman? James flashes the balance badge. Jessie smiles, but gets quiet. James asks her what's wrong. She unloaded all of her frustrations on James. James comments losing a gym battle is not the end of the world. You can always re-challenge. That's the problem, Jessie screams. I already re-challenged the gym and lost. James gets quiet. Jessie continues, I tried 2 times and I couldn't beat Watson. Now I don't know what to do. I can't even get Numel to listen to me. James tells Jessie, let's have a battle. Maybe it'll help. Jessie stares at James and eventually agrees. And they get started. Jessie chooses Numel. James sends out Zangoose. Jessie is impressed. James has caught a new Pokemon. She's glad to see he's keeping up with his training. Jessie starts barking out commands, but Numel won't move. It just lays there. James tells Zangoose to use Crush Claw, which connects. This does get Numel's attention, and it suddenly wants to battle. Jessie, out of frustration, says, finally! Then orders an Ember, but Zangoose dodges and connects with another Crush Claw, knocking it out. Jessie lets out another scream of frustration. This always happens. James recalls Zangoose, and then they head inside the base. James is trying to talk Jessie down as he establishes communication with Meowth to update on the situation. Once Meowth answers, he tells Jessie and James that they need to return to Mount Chimney Base at once. No excuses. Jessie says, but I haven't beaten Watson yet. Meowth says, no excuses. Get here now, and hangs up the phone. Jessie is now even more frustrated. Why is Meowth insisting that they return? James tries to calm Jessie down, insisting that they will return once they hear out Meowth and what it has to say. Jessie doesn't like this, but she agrees, and they return to Mount Chimney. They do seize the opportunity of some training along the way there, and as a result, they discover one major thing. Seviper and Zangoose do not get along. Even more than Arbok and Seviper. Even Arbok seems to have a problem with Zangoose. But, anyway, they arrive back at Mount Chimney. Once they enter, Meowth asks them what took so long, where have they been? James says it took a minute, but they did get here. What is so important that they had to return for? Meowth says, them. It's Butch and Cassidy. Jessie asks, what are they doing there? Cassidy tells her, is that any way to talk to your boss? Jessie gets quiet. Butch tells them they are here to take over this base. It was Meowth's task to get a real base ready for them, as the one in Dewford Island was not what you would call a command post for Team Rocket. It was pathetic. James snaps at Butch. That was no reason to call them back so urgently. They still have things to do. Cassidy tells the two of them, that is not the reason that you were called back. Jessie says, then what is it? Cassidy says, that's simple. You two have gained quite the teams of Pokemon between the two of you. So it's simple. It's time you make your payment. James says, payment? Questioning what they mean. Butch responds, you know, the fee for being a member of Team Rocket. Giving up your Pokemon to further Team Rocket's power. Jessie responds to Butch and Cassidy. You're both crazy if you think we're gonna just give up our Pokemon. We're the ones who raised them, and... But before Jessie could continue, Cassidy cuts her off with just a laugh. It's funny that you think you have a choice. Jessie and James are silent. Butch adds in, you two have worked for Team Rocket for years and have never paid your tab. You're consistently draining it of its money and resources. Now it's time to pay up. James responds, "And what if we refuse?" Cassidy says, "That's simple. We revoke your Pokédex and send you back to Kanto, where you can explain to Giovanni why you refuse to make payment." This infuriates Jessie, and she throws a huge fit, talking trash to Cassidy, calling her all sorts of names. Then James chimes in, telling Jessie that if they don't comply, they're going back to Kanto, which could result in them losing all of their Pokemon. One is better than none. Upon realizing this, Jessie changes her tune and happily offers up a Pokemon. And like clockwork, it pops out of its ball. Wobbuffet. Jessie figures if one's gotta go, let it be the one she likes the least. Cassidy then says, normally we would only take one Pokemon each, but due to your disrespect to a superior Jessie, it will now cost 3 total. 1 from James and 2 from Jessie. And the choices will be ours, not yours. Jessie's jaw drops in stumped silence. James doesn't like it, but complies and sends out his 6 Pokemon. After looking over James's team, Butch's choice lands to Breloom. James doesn't like this, and Breloom doesn't want to go, but Butch grabs the Pokeball and tells James to order Breloom to come with him. After a tearful goodbye, James does, and Butch recalls Breloom. He thanks James for his payment, and then they turn to Jessie. Jessie is internally panicking. Now she will lose 2 Pokemon, and she doesn't get to choose. Now she will have an even harder time beating Watson. Cassidy then interrupts Jessie's internal thought to remind her to send out her Pokemon. Jessie reluctantly does so. When Butch's choice was made, he did it out of what would best suit his battle style and complement his current team of Pokemon. Cassidy, on the other hand, her choice will be purely out of malice. She wants to hit Jessie where it hurts and knows immediately where to start. Cassidy says, "Arbok, hand over its ball." This hits Jessie hard. Arbok is her oldest Pokemon, and out of shock, she doesn't even put up a fight. Then, Cassidy looks at her other 5 Pokemon. Wobbuffet is already out, and she already has Arbok, so she just passes over Seviper. Dustox creeps her out with its bug eyes, and Loudred just reminds Cassidy of Jessie and her big mouth. But Numel strikes Cassidy. She loves it. It's so cute in its sleepy ways. Cassidy says, "Numel, hand over its ball." Before Jessie can even protest, Cassidy recalls Numel and Arbok. Jessie is speechless. Her best Pokemon and her newest Pokemon. Sure, Numel was a pain, but it was her pain. Now she won't even have the chance to train with it. James, knowing Jessie, tells her not to worry. She can use some of his Pokemon to battle Watson, as she did with Norman. But Cassidy and Butch chime in. "Well, I don't think that will be happening." James asks why. Butch responds, "That's simple. We have your assignments for you two." Jessie questions, "Assignments?" Cassidy says yes. "You two did say you would keep track of Team Aqua and Team Magma as Team Rocket's field agents, didn't you?" Jessie and James stay silent. "Good," Cassidy says. Cassidy hands Jessie her orders and tells her to return to the base on Route 111 and wait further instructions. Jessie asks, "What about the Mauville gym?" Cassidy says, "I don't care what you do. Just make sure when we call, you answer, or there will be repercussions." This shouldn't be a problem, Jessie thinks to herself, as she can link the Pokédex with the computer in the base and have it transmitted straight to her. Butch hands James his orders. James is to proceed to Mount Pyre, as reports of Team Aqua and Team Magma have been spotted in that area. James asks, does it matter how he gets there? Butch says no, but he needs to get there ASAP. James says okay, he knows how he is going to play this. Jessie then asks, what's Meowth's orders? Who is he to go with? Cassidy responds, that's simple. Meowth is staying right here. Jessie and James are not surprised. Meowth is a valuable resource. that Butch and Cassidy would exploit. Meowth tells them it's his choice. This shocks Jessie and James. Meowth tells them he's always wanted to work behind the scenes in Team Rocket, and that this is his chance, so he isn't going to blow it for anyone. Jessie and James understand. Due to the tension with Butch and Cassidy, Jessie and James opt not to stay the night and head out the same day. The two head east down Route 111 until they get to the desert. Jessie stops at it and looks at the never-ending sandstorm in it. James tells her that they need to get going. Jessie turns to James. This is where we're going to part ways. James says why. Jessie tells James she needs to do some intense training, and this place would be perfect. James reminds Jessie of her orders. Jessie says don't worry, she won't be long, and she doesn't think Cassidy will be calling her anytime soon anyway. James reluctantly says okay, and he tells Jessie to be careful. She tells him that she will, and good luck, as the two part ways. Now, we're going to follow James as he makes his way through Mauville City, no problem. Then, James decides to make his way to the Four Tree Drim as he runs back into Ash and his friends in the events of That's Just Swallow. The events all play out the same, with Ash's Swallow evolving and James competing in the finals, but he uses Masquerin instead of Dustox. But he still loses. Ash does compliment James on the power of his Masquerin, and Brock questions where Jessie and Meowth is. James tells them that they have all headed their own paths for now, but he is on his way to the Four Tree City gym to earn his 6th badge. Ash tells James that he is headed there as well. Then they part ways. Next comes the offense of unfair weathered friends. Because James is actively looking for Team Aqua and Magma, here he would get involved due to Team Aqua attacking the Weather Institute, leaving only him to fend off Team Aqua. This delay does mean one thing for James. James will not make it to Four Tree City in time to catch Chimecho, due to James's pursuit of Team Aqua to gather intel, eventually losing track of them. James does eventually make it to Four Tree City. He arrives after Ash and friends have already departed. James heads to the gym and meets Winona, the flying type battler. James knows that this will be a tough gym, but he is prepared for this. One of the things he did pick up from Ash was teaching his Pokemon new moves, and he has been training with particularly Lairon, Zangoose, and Masquerin while he was traveling to the Four Tree Gym to help in the battle. Winona greets James and leads him to the battlefield. Winona sends in her Skarmory to start the battle. James sends in Lairon. His defensive strategy ends up paying off as Skarmory attacks repeatedly over and over, and it's now worn down, so it has to land. While Lairon has been taking damage, it's been doing its best to hold on for this exact moment. When Skarmory lands, James orders Lairon to use the new move that they've been working on, Rock Tomb, a callback to his battle with Roxanne. The Rock Tomb connects, trapping Skarmory, and due to its fatigue, James orders a takedown, securing his first victory of the match. Winona then sends in her Altaria. James sticks with his Lairon, but unfortunately, it's worn out from the battle with Skarmory, and one Dragon Breath takes it out. James is unfazed. He sends in Zangoose. Zangoose proves to be able to match Altaria's speed, but Dragon's Breath does connect, causing paralysis. James orders a Crush Claw, but it misses. Then Altaria is ordered to use Sky Attack. As it comes in, James orders Zangoose to use Shockwave. This is a move that he was working on with Zangoose, courtesy of his time that he spent in the Mauville gym with Watson. The Shockwave catches Winona off guard, and Altaria flies right into it. This doesn't knock it out, but it does stun it long enough for Zangoose to land a Crush Claw. Altaria stands back up and fires a Dragon Breath. This unfortunately is enough force to knock out Zangoose, putting James to just one Pokemon. James wants to end this on Winona's turf, so he sends in Masquerin. Altaria is worn out, and as a result, Masquerin is able to put it down with a Silver Wind. The use of this attack has some added effects on Masquerin. Winona is impressed with James. She tells him that she will come at him with full force, and sends out Swallow. The battle is super intense between the two, but Swallow does have the speed advantage, and manages to hit Masquerain with an aerial ace, and then a hyper beam. Masquerain is barely holding on, and just as Winona calls for another hyper beam, James counters it with the water pulse that connects, causing confusion. James sees this is his chance and he calls for a Silver Wind, then follows up with the Gust, pushing Swallow to the ground, knocking it out, and earning James his 6th badge. Later that day, James makes an attempt to contact Jessie, but nothing. So he makes contact with Meowth. James tells Meowth that she isn't answering. Meowth tells James that he has also tried, but has been unsuccessful. But Butch and Cassidy have made no attempt to contact her. James wants to check in on her, but Meowth tells him no, he needs to proceed to Mount Pyre, as not to raise any type of suspicion. James agrees reluctantly, and moves on from Fortreach City to Mount Pyre. Flash over to Jessie. The time she spent in the desert has been harsh. She hasn't even bothered to go back to the base on Route 111. She has now spent 2 weeks in the desert training. In this time, Jessie worked with Seviper and taught it Dig. She figured without Arbok, she would need to broaden the move pool of her current Pokemon. This was something she did after talking with James, as he told her that he would be doing the same. But that's not all. She has also worked with Loudred and taught it Rock Smash, after training with one of the Ruin Hunters in the desert. As a result, Jessie thinks she may have discovered a fossil when Loudred was practicing Rock Smash. The Ruin Hunter she had befriended during her time in the desert had become a great training partner. After an additional 2 weeks in the desert, Jessie decides to move on. Her new friend does stop her before she goes. He hands her a Pokeball and tells her that this old partner of his would be better off with her, and that she should head off to the Devon Corporation in Rustbow City. There, they have the technology to potentially revive the fossil she found. Jessie takes his advice and heads back to Rustboro. After about 2 weeks, Jessie walks out of the Devon building with a Pokeball in her hand, thinking to herself, "Watson, I'm coming for you." Little does she know, Cassidy has decided to check up on her. And as Jessie is not answering, Cassidy has decided to personally check up on Jessie. We pick up with Jessie. She is heading back to Mauville City. She decides to stop off in Verdanturf Town at the Pokemon Center. Once arriving, she checks her Pokemon into the center and is met with Nurse Joy, who says she has a message for her. It's from Meowth to call immediately. Jessie contacts Meowth, who is in a panic, and asks where she's been. Jessie says she's been training. Why? What's the problem? Meowth says Cassie has been trying to get a hold of her at the base, but because she couldn't, she decided to check up on Jessie in person. Jessie starts to panic. If she doesn't get back, it could cost her a Pokemon, or they could send her back to Kanto. Meowth tells Jessie that she has some times. He tells Jessie he gave Cassidy a GPS that would take her the long way, but she has to hurry. Cassidy left a day ago and will arrive soon. Jessie wastes no time, heading out at once her Pokemon are ready. It takes her about a day, but she does manage to get back to the area that the base is in, and on her way there, Jessie spots, off in the distance, Cassidy driving toward the base. Wasting no time, Jessie decides to take the quick path down the mountainside. Jessie struggles as she is on foot and Cassidy is traveling by car. Though it was close, Jessie manages to get back to the base just seconds before Cassidy pulls up. Once inside, the base is still a mess. This works in her advantage, as it seems some wild Pokemon got in and damaged the power supply to the base. Once Cassidy arrives inside, she jumps on Jessie about her failure to comply with answering the calls. Jessie points out that the shape of the base that it's in. Jessie makes up a story on how when she got back, some wild Pokemon had moved in and damaged the power supply to the base, and wrecked most of it. Jessie states that she has also been trying to re-establish connection, but as she is not tech-savvy like Meowth, it's taken her some time to do so. Surprisingly, Cassidy buys this excuse. Not because Jessie is convincing, but because Cassidy believes that Jessie is too incompetent to do anything technology-based on her own. Which, to be fair, is mostly true. Jessie lets out a sigh of relief. but then asks why Cassidy is there. Has she come to take another one of her Pokemon? Cassidy laughs. Oh heavens no. Your current team of 4 doesn't interest me in the slightest. Jessie thinks, team of 4? She must not know about the ones that she has just obtained, and she aims to keep it that way. Jessie asks, then why are you here? Cassidy replies, simple. Your new orders. Jessie thinks, great. She's going to send me to somewhere else just to rot away. Cassidy tells Jessie she is to head south to Slateport City and then to catch a ferry to Pacific Logtown. But you won't be going alone. Jessie asks, what do you mean? Cassidy says, with a bit of irritation in her voice, you can come in now. Jessie looks. There stands Agent 009, the Black Tulip, Domino. Domino enters the room. Jessie asks why she is in Hoenn. The boss only sends her out when he thinks that the situation is severe. Cassidy tries to speak, but is cut off by Domino. That's right. You see, some new information has recently come to light about Team Aqua and Magma. And you see, the boss is hard-pressed to say that the job is being done here in Hoenn is in the best interest of Team Rocket. As such, now Butch, Cassidy, you, and anyone else working for Team Rocket in Hoenn will be reporting directly to me. Jessie is a bit relieved. Although she doesn't like the idea of a chaperone, it seems Cassidy doesn't either, so this could keep Cassidy off of Jessie's case, for now anyway. Jessie asks, so what are we going to do next? Domino orders Cassidy to get the base clean and operation at once. Then she needs to staff it like it is supposed to be, or she will face the consequences. Domino then tells Jessie that they are going to Mauville City to check out the area of New Mauville, and they leave at once. This is perfect for Jessie. She wanted to go there anyway to battle Watson, but she has to lose Domino, at least for a few hours. The two set out for Mauville, and once they arrive, they check into the Pokemon Center. Jessie tells Domino they should rest their Pokemon, as they don't know when they would have a chance to do it again. Domino tells Jessie that she doesn't have any Pokemon. She doesn't need them. She doesn't need to rely on them, and she can get by on her own. Jessie just shrugs. Okay. And as the two are eating, discussing plans for New Mauville, Jessie and Domino overhear some talks about how they had heard rumors that Team Magma was in Mauville City. Jessie thinks, perfect. She somehow convinces Domino that it would be in the best interest of Team Rocket that if they split up, one to check out New Mauville, the other one to check out the rumors of Team Magma. Domino agrees. She assigns Jessie the task of investigating the room in the city of Mauville, while she goes to check out New Mauville. Jessie loves this idea, as while she's investigating the rumors, she can investigate them at the gym. The next morning, the two get ready to head out, but before doing so, Jessie stops Domino and says, here. Jessie gives her a Pokeball and tells her, I know you don't like to use them, but just in case you run into trouble, that this could help you out. Domino looks at it, doesn't say a word, grabs the ball and walks off. Jessie did this because if Domino's doesn't need it, then at the very least she could earn some bonus points, which she desperately needs right now. As then she goes to investigate at the gym. Once arriving at the gym, Watson greets her and asks if she is here for another rematch. Jessie says yes, but first she needs to speak with Watson's assistant, Watt. Watt, surprised by this, asks Jessie what she needs. Jessie asks Watt if he knows anything about Pokédexes. He says a little. Jessie asks, great, maybe you can help me. My Pokédex was damaged recently, and it has been registering Pokemon that she hasn't caught. I was wondering if there's any way to turn off that function until I can get it fixed or replaced. Watt tells Jessie, oh yeah, you can do that. Let me take a look. He goes into the settings to try and turn it off, but there's a problem. It is password protected. Watt asks Jessie for the password, and Jessie says she doesn't know it. Watt tells Jessie that he can override it, but it'll take some time. Watson chimes in, great. While he's doing that, we can have our battle. Jessie and Watson get started. Watson sends in Voltorb. This is different for Jessie. The last 2 times she challenged Watson, he led with Magneton, and she couldn't put it down. But she is okay with this, and she sends in Seviper. and the battle gets underway. It does take some time, but Jessie is able to put down Voltorb as Seviper now knows Dig. Watson is impressed. Jessie has become a lot stronger since their last battle. Watson puts the pressure on and sends in Manectric. Jessie decides to recall Seviper and now sends in Loudred. The battle between the two of them is a fierce one, neither one wanting to give any ground. But in the end, Loudred does fall to Manectric, so Jessie sends back in Seviper. But Manectric is tired from the battle with Loudred. Jessie knows this and uses it to her advantage. Watson orders Manectric to use Quick Attack. Jessie orders Dig to dodge, and then Seviper follows up with a Poison Tail. This puts down Manectric. This leaves Watson with just one Pokemon, and he sends in Magneton. This hits a nerve with Jessie, but Watson tells her he's impressed. She's made it this far. This battle has been won for the record books. Watson wants Jessie to bring her best. Jessie realizes he's right. She's done better now than ever. Jessie orders Seviper to use Bind, but it does get caught with a Thunderbolt. Seviper is down, but not out. Jessie then orders a Dig, which connects, but then is met with a Sonic Boom, knocking Seviper out. Jessie is in a spot. She didn't think she would get this far, but she can't give in now. She pulls out her last Pokeball and sends in. Over with Domino, she is arriving by boat to New Mauville. Domino is there acting like a tourist, trying to blend in to tour New Mauville. As she suspected, there are signs of Team Magma here, and she deviates from the tour to investigate further. As she gets deeper into the facility, she is confronted by Team Magma, and they have cornered Domino. She prides herself on being able to get out of tight places, but then she is recognized by the admin, Tabitha. He knows who she is and what she is about, and he will not be letting her out of here. Tabitha calls for any Magma agents that can come provide assistance. Domino realizes she is in a tight spot. Domino struggles to avoid Magma grunts and their Pokemon, but she just can't clear them all. Domino is starting to become overwhelmed, but then she remembers the Pokeball that Jessie gave her. She doesn't like it, but she has no choice. Domino throws the ball. Back at the gym, Jessie's final Pokemon is the one the old Ruin Man gave her, a Claydol. Jessie knows this is her chance. Watson calls for a Sonic Boom, but Jessie uses it to create a Sand Tomb, which traps Magneton. Jessie doesn't want to lose this chance, and she calls for a Hyper Beam. Watson tries to counter with a Zap Cannon, but Magneton can't get the move off, and the Hyper Beam connects with an explosion. Back in New Mauville, Domino, with her back to the wall, sends in the Pokemon Jessie gave her. It's Dustox. Domino is at first disgusted by it, but then Domino realizes Dustox can handle large groups of foes, and she uses this to her advantage, create a distraction with Whirlwind and Stun Spore. She makes her escape back to the boat, back to the group who is boarding the boat back to Mauville City. Back at the gym, as the dust settles, Claydol stands, but Magneton falls. Jessie can't believe it. Finally, after weeks of hardship, she has finally leveled up. All of her struggles have come to an end. Watson presents Jessie with the Dynamo badge, and then Watt approaches Jessie with her Pokédex. He tells her it was difficult, but he was able to get through the password. Jessie can now disable the register function. But Watt tells Jessie this Pokédex is unlike anything he has ever seen before. This Pokédex has a built-in GPS to track you, and it also has a hidden section that I couldn't access. Whoever made this didn't want someone unauthorized to access it. Jessie thanks Watt for the help. At the very least, she can prevent them from tracking the new Pokemon she catches. But if there's a GPS, then why didn't Cassidy use it to her advantage? Maybe she didn't know. Jessie thanks Watt and Watson for the battle, and then heads to the Pokemon Center. Back at the center, Jessie meets up with Domino. Domino asks Jessie if she was able to find out any new leads. Jessie tells Domino that they were all dead ends. What about you? Domino explains that she had a run-in with Team Magma. Then she does something Jessie didn't expect. Domino thanks Jessie. She tells Jessie that Without dust stalks, she would have been able to make it out of there. She then makes a request of Jessie. She asks Jessie if she wouldn't mind if she held on to dust stalks for a while. Jessie is surprised. Domino is asking, not demanding. Domino tells Jessie once they have figured out what Team Magma and Aqua are up to, she can have it back. Jessie thinks if she says no, she could be punished. But if she says yes, then it could give her favor with Domino. Jessie says yes, of course. Why not? We need to do everything we can to prevent Team Aqua and Magma's plans. Domino agrees. As a reward, Domino grants Jessie one request of her choice. Jessie is taken back by this. So she asks Domino for one simple thing: to travel and investigate Team Aqua and Magma alone. It would be more efficient, and they can cover more territory while looking for Team Aqua and Team Magma. After some thought, Domino agrees. After all, Jessie's actions to this point have seemed to be on the level, and Team Rocket seems to have her full support. Domino grants her request. Jessie can act of her own accord from here on out. The only person she will report to is Domino directly. Internally, Jessie is celebrating. Now she has a free pass, and she will have Cassidy off her back indefinitely. Domino tells Jessie she is heading out right away. She has to make it to Pacific Logtown. Jessie is left to her own devices. Now we switch over to James. After his win at the Fort Tree Gym, he has been making his way to Mount Pyre. Along the way, James has been doing what he can for training. James has had a few encounters with some wild Pokemon, but one in particular has caught his attention. A wild Meditite. It has been attacking James while camping. James has entered its territory, and after a tough battle with Meditite and Masquerain, James throws a Pokeball and is able to catch it. Just as the sun starts to rise over the horizon, revealing Mount Pyre. We pick up with James as he boards a boat heading toward Mount Pyre, when he hears someone calling him from behind. James turns, and there stands Butch, out of breath, trying to gasp out words. James asks Butch why he is here. Butch was ordered by Domino to catch up with James to establish a base on Mount Pyre. But James doesn't know that Domino is in Hoenn, so Butch plays it off like he is here to oversee James to make sure he doesn't screw up the operation. James doesn't question this, as he has no new info, so he just accepts it, and the two board the ship. During the boat ride, James tries to make small talk, but Butch, out of fear, keeps his answers short and to the point, as not to accidentally give up any information about the recent changes and what basically counts as his demotion. Once the two arrive, Butch debriefs James. Team Rocket believes that Team Magma and Aqua are searching for ancient ruins, and they believe that there may be some here on Mount Pyre. The two stare at the magnificent mountain, and then decide to make their ascension. Butch leads the two to inside the mountain, and the shrine on the top floor. It takes some time, but the two manage to make their way to the top floor. The inside of Mount Pyre is teeming with ghost-type Pokemon. James uses Cacnea, while Butch uses Breloom to clear the way. James is frustrated that Butch is using Breloom, adding insult to injury, but he is happy that it seems to be cared for. It tries to return to James, but each time it does, Butch reminds it that James is no longer his trainer, taunting Breloom with his Pokeball. After clearing out all the ghost-type, James and Butch look around, but there is nothing there. Some old gravestones and a lot of dust. Butch doesn't get it. Why would Team Aqua and Magma be interested in this place? James doesn't get it either. Something isn't right. James then questions Butch on the intel, asking if he's sure this was right. Butch reminds James who's in charge and that his insubordination will not be tolerated. Butch's outburst at a simple question has James wondering what's up. As the two start to argue, they feel the mountains start to shake. It's coming from outside. The two start to head back outside. About halfway down, James notices a door that they didn't notice before. He points it out to Butch, so they head outside and are immediately met with a horde of aqua grunts. They are there to provide security and are guarding the path that leads to the top of the mountain. All of the grunts have an army of Crawdon, and it is too much for James and Butch to fight through. But James has an ace. He sends out Wheezing and tells it to use Explosion. This clears a path, and James uses it to his advantage, leaving Butch behind. He does not like this, and Butch chases after James. James fights his way to the top with his Zangoose, Lairon, and his new Metatite, with Butch barely able to keep up with just Breloom. Butch is getting more and more frustrated. James is actually able to handle this on his own. He is capable, and it's making Butch look incompetent. Once at the top, James and Butch are met with the admin of Team Aqua, Shelly, and their leader, Archie. Both Shelly and Archie are trying to break down a sealed chamber door with their Crawdon and Mightyena. James orders Zangoose to use Shockwave and Lairon to use Rock Tomb. This cuts off Archie and Shelly and gets their full attention. Shelly demands to know who they are and why would they dare interrupt Team Aqua. Butch, in order not to be upstaged by James, announces that they are Team Rocket and they will not be letting them leave here. Archie tells Shelly to handle them while he finishes his mission. Archie and his Crawdon head to the shrine, and Shelly and Mightyena face off against Butch, while James is forced to face off what remains of the Aqua Grunts. Butch and Breloom are struggling against Shelly. Breloom can't stand up to the attacks of multiple opponents, as some of the grunts have attacked. But James, with Wheezing, is able to take out the grunts with an explosion, finishing off any stragglers that remain. Then, James steps in to assist Butch with Wheezing. He is able to push back Shelly and turn the tide of this battle. As Shelly is being pushed back, she is ordered by Archie to retreat. They have what they came for. Team Aqua retreats via helicopter, leaving James and Butch standing there in complete stunned belief as they don't know what just happened. James heads inside the shrine, and he heads to the opening created by Archie. Inside the shrine, it's destroyed. Butch follows James in and starts to yell at him. James asks what his problem is. Butch tells James, "How dare you make me look so bad?" James asks what he means. Butch says, "Don't act like you don't know. Coming in here and fighting off Team Aqua all by yourself, then helping me stop Shelly, trying to take all of the credit. What are you going to do? Report back to Mount Chimney Base to get me sent back to Kanto?" James asks, "What do you mean?" "I'm just trying to gather intel and stop Team Aqua like you ordered me to." Butch then asks, "Are you getting smart with me? Your superior?" James again says, "What are you talking about?" Butch, tired of James's backtalk, tells him, "That's it. I'm tired of your mouth. Hand over Wheezing." James says, "What?" "You heard me. Wheezing. Hand it over." Butch is doing this to punish James for actions that he thinks James did. James is hesitant. He doesn't want to hand over Wheezing. Butch tells him, "Hand it over or back to Kanto." James reluctantly does so and asks, "Will there be anything else?" Butch then remarks he has to stay here and establish a base. But in order to punish James, he orders him to give chase to Team Aqua and find their base. Thinking, let's see if James can handle large groups without his prized Pokemon, Wheezing. James is so confused and uncomfortable. Without a word, James makes his way down Mount Pyre. He is thinking to himself the whole way. This whole encounter was odd. Butch being here, his behavior, and his insecurity of James basically saving him. James can't wrap his head around it. As he heads back inside, he is again met with the horde of Pokemon that is being led by a Dusclops. It is ordering all of the ghost types to attack James. James ends up going through all of his Pokemon, fighting off all the ghost types, until he is just him and Meditite left. Meditite is battling hard. James then comes to the conclusion that if he wants to get out of here, he's going to have to take down Dusclops. James orders Meditite to attack Dusclops with the Thunder Punch. It connects, but Dusclops retaliates with the Shadow Ball, which hits with a lot of damage. Meditite is struggling to stay up, but its fighting spirit won't be put down. James orders it to use a Confusion, then to follow up with the Jump Kick. The Confusion hits, but Jump Kick misses, and Meditite is met with a Shadow Punch. This hits Meditite, knocking it back. It is barely hanging on. Then it starts to glow. James uses the Pokédex and finds out that this is Meditite's ability, Pure Power. He knows that Meditite's attack is doubled, but he will only have one shot to put down Dusclops. James orders Meditite to use Jump Kick. This lures Dusclops in, and when it tries Shadow Punch, but is met with a Thunder Punch that connects with Dusclops, putting it down. James tries to leave, but Dusclops stands back up. It won't stop, and James can see it. So he throws a Pokeball at it to catch it, but the ball fails. James then orders another Thunder Punch from Meditite, which then paralyzes Dusclops. James then tries another Pokeball, this time with success. Once Dusclops is captured, the rest of the ghost Pokemon lose interest in James and dissipate. James then recalls Meditite and heads back to the boat. He needs to get to Lilycove City to heal his Pokemon. Now, we pick back up with Jessie. She is on a boat in the middle of the ocean. After Domino left her in the last episode, she decided to head towards Sootopolis City to challenge the gym. But she came across a mysterious island in the middle of nowhere. This island seems that it could be a mirage. It's like it's not real. But it's getting dark, and the captain of the boat has decided to go ashore and to set up camp for the night. But once they are on the island, they are being watched by someone or something. We pick up with Jessie, who has made camp, but she can't sleep and decides to check out the island. After walking around, she gets the feeling she is being watched, so she heads back to camp. Once back, her camp has been ransacked, and she is furious. But as she is thrashing about, Wobbuffet pops out of its ball and is wailing about. It is trying to get Jessie's attention. Once it finally does, it is pointing in a direction that leads inland. Jessie grabs Wobbuffet and heads in that direction. After a while, they come to a lush grove that seems to have had a lot of human activity. This grove seems to be a special kind of berry that grows in it. Jessie has never seen them before, but then Wobbuffet starts to flare, pointing at something. Jessie goes to check it out, and underneath one of the bushes is a small Pokemon. It is cowering in front of Jessie, but then Wobbuffet comes over, and the Pokemon comes out and starts to converse with Wobbuffet. Jessie pulls out her Pokédex to find out that this Pokemon is Wynet, the baby form of Wobbuffet. The two Pokemon conversate for a little while, and then Wynet calls out, and then all of a sudden, Jessie is surrounded by a crowd of Wynet. Wobbuffet is trying to tell Jessie what is going on. She doesn't understand what is happening. But before Jessie can decipher the babble that is Wobbuffet, she hears a familiar voice from behind her. She turns, and it's someone she recognizes, the Iron Masked Marauder. He tells Jessie he wasn't expecting someone from Team Rocket to come for him, but it won't matter. He'll take care of her like all of the others. Jessie thinks to herself. She knows that the Iron Masked Marauder was wanted by Team Rocket after betraying them, but she didn't know he was here in Hoenn. Then she puts it all together. He must be the one here destroying this grove, the home of the Wynet. Jessie then remembers that he is also in possession of the Dark Balls, and all of his Pokemon will be more powerful than usual. The Iron Masked Marauder wastes no time and sends in one of his newest captures, a Flygon. And this thing is mean, but Jessie sees this as an opportunity to try out her newest Pokemon, and she sends in her Lileep. But Wobbuffet isn't going to stand back, as it wants to protect the Wynet. Jessie's two Pokemon face off against Flygon. Even though it is clearly at a higher level than Lileep and Wobbuffet, the two play a pretty good stall game, with Wobbuffet countering everything, and Lileep managing to pull off a Toxic against Flygon. In the end, Flygon falls, and Jessie, Wobbuffet, and all the Wynot manage to chase the Iron Mask Marauder from the island. As the sun starts to rise, the time comes for Jessie to leave, as her ship is setting sail. But when she tries to recall Wobbuffet, it refuses. It doesn't want to go. It wants to stay on the island to protect the Wynot, just in case the Iron Mask Marauder returns. Jessie is saddened by this, but doesn't want to show it. She ultimately decides to leave Wobbuffet there, on the mysterious Mirage Island. A few days pass. Jessie is now close to Slateport City, but she has had to stop off on an island that is uninhabited, one of many in the Hoenn region. While there, the captain of the boat informs her that they will be stuck there a few days, as the boat's engine are not starting. Jessie is annoyed, but makes do with this time, training with her Pokemon, mostly with Loudred and the Leap. The training is fruitful, as during the training, Loudred evolves into Exploud, and it is powerful. Jessie has never seen so much power. But, only one problem. It won't listen to Jessie now. Every time she gives a command, it attacks her instead. Also, it has decided to attack a group of wild Walrein that live on the north side of the island. But because it is outmatched, it ends up getting beaten by them. Jessie spends about a week overall on the island. During that time, she has made friends with the Walrein and their offspring, the Spheal. One of these Spheals is not like the others though. It won't go anywhere near the main group, and Jessie notices it. It won't go near anyone, but with some patience, I know, this is Jessie we're talking about. She manages to befriend the Spheal. After the loss of Numel, Jessie has cooled a little bit and learned to temper her emotions toward her Pokemon. As a result, when it comes time for Jessie to leave the island, Spheal joins her as it has no ties to the island. Jessie decides she will treat Spheal better than she did with Numel, as she really never took the time to appreciate it. And with that, she arrives in Slateport City and the sight of her 6th badge. Now we switch over to Domino. She has been in Pacific Log Town for several weeks now, and there are no traces of Team Aqua. Unfortunately, it seems they have moved on from this place, and she is left with nothing but dead ends. But she does hear about a local legend telling of an island with a pillar reaching into the sky. It's not Team Aqua or Magma, but it is ancient and it could have something to do with them. And sure enough, upon arrival to the island, Team Magma is present, but it seems they can't get in to the spear pillar. After many failed attempts, they give up. All the while, Domino was keeping a low profile to gather intel. She makes her way onto the main ship, but gets trapped as the ship sets sail. She overhears the leader of Team Magma, Maxie, talking about how they need to find the orb. So they set sail towards their next target, whatever it is. Domino is now along for the ride. Now, we pick up with James. He has been in Lily Cove for about a week. His Pokemon are all in great shape, but Dusclops is giving him some trouble. It prefers to cause mischief instead of listening to James. So James decides to enter a local contest and try to bond with it. It doesn't go so well. James does manage to clear the preliminaries with Dusclops, but not because it listens, but because it puts on a good show due to its mischievous nature. James gets to use a different Pokemon for the battle rounds, and ends up using his Meditite. He ends up in the finals, and it's a familiar face that's his opponent's, Grace and her Medicham. She is trying here for her 5th contest ribbon. The battle with the two gets underway. It pushes James's Meditite to the point of evolving, but ultimately it is not enough to win the ribbon. Grace does tell James that he should consider becoming a coordinator. He has a knack for it. This puts a thought into James's head as he heads back to the Pokemon Center. He then contacts Meowth at the Mount Chimney base and learns that Team Aqua has then moved on from Lilyco City to somewhere near Slateport City. James knows his next destination as he heads out. Now, we pick up with Cassidy. She has been doing as Domino ordered her. She's been cleaning up the base and she's finally got it staffed with Team Rocket grunts. Now, she doesn't know what to do. She does contact Butch. After some conversating, Butch and Cassidy come to the realization that Domino aims to leave them in the dark. She doesn't trust them, and they don't know why. I mean, sure, they did have it out specifically for Jessie and James, but they have been loyal members to Team Rocket for many years. They've had many successful missions, and they've always delivered when Giovanni asked. So why has Domino been sent to Hoenn? They don't get it. And all it's doing is causing animosity between those two with Domino. Ultimately, Cassie decides that she is not going to stick around. Even though she was ordered to stay put by Domino, she does not want to be stuck in this base. But she knows she can't return to the Mount Chimney base because Meowth is there, and Meowth will report her immediately. After all, he does know everything that's going on with her and Butch being demoted. So, Cassie then makes the decision to head to Mount Pyre, where Butch is, as he is the only operative from Team Rocket there. It does take several weeks, and along the way, Cassidy does manage to pick up a new Pokemon. Let me introduce you to Cassidy's Tropius. With this and the Pokemon that she took from Jessie, it now brings her to 3. With that, she makes her way to Mount Pyre. It does take her a couple more days, but once she arrives, she meets with Butch. Butch has made some serious progress in establishing a base. The base is secluded on the opposite side of the mountain where the ruins were found, as they don't want to be spotted. But he has established communication with Meowth at Mount Chimney and has informed Meowth that he is up and running. They are just waiting for support from additional grunts. But Butch does not tell Meowth that Cassidy is there. After Butch ends the call with Meowth, him and Cassidy get to talking. They don't like the way they're being treated. They're being treated like they're Jessie and James, like they're incompetent. There's no reason for it. The two are getting more and more frustrated the more and more they talk about it. Then, out of nowhere, there's a helicopter approaching. And on the side of it, they recognize the symbol. It's Team Magma. The two rush to the top of the mountain, where the ancient ruins are, as that's where the helicopter has landed. They are met with Tabitha and Maxie, the leader of Team Magma. Maxie is a lot more cordial. He's not as aggressive as Archie, and instead of trying to initiate a battle with the two, he talks with them, asking them why they are here, and they try not to give up any information. Maxie insists that what they're doing isn't for the right side, and he says that he may have someone that can persuade them. Butch and Cassidy wants to know what he's talking about, and he says, "We have recently acquired a former associate of Team Rocket. Maybe you know who he is." And then Maxie turns, and out steps out of the helicopter one of the former scientists of Team Rocket, Professor Namba. Namba tells Cassidy and Butch that after his failure in the Whirl Islands, Giovanni wanted him to be dismissed, and he tried to take all of his research from him. So Namba fled to the Hoenn region, but then was contacted by Team Magma. Now he works for Team Magma and helps to try and further their goals. He tells Butch and Cassidy that they are on the wrong side. Magma then turns to Butch and Cassidy and makes them a proposition. Join me and work for Team Magma to help us further our goals in Hoenn, so that way we can ensure the survival of human and Pokemon alike. We pick up with Jessie arriving in Slateport City. Once she arrives, she heads immediately for the gym and meets its leader, Hoenn. Hoenn is happy to meet Jessie and is intrigued to have a battle with her. He informs her that they will have a 5-on-5 Pokemon battle each. Their first battle will be a double battle, and if Jessie can clear the battle then, they will move on to a 3-on-3 singles with the remaining Pokemon. Jessie accepts these terms, and they start the battle. Hoenn leads with his Masquerain and his Pelipper. Jessie recognizes that these two are flying types dueled with Bug and Water, so she sends in Spheal and Lileep. The battle is a very unusual battle for Jessie. Hoenn was a Pokemon coordinator in a past life, and as a result, he has developed a battle style that uses power with elegance. But Jessie's Lileep has the ability of Storm Drain. This makes all of Juan's water-type attacks useless, and Lileep also has the move Ingrain. This makes it so Jessie can stall Juan out. Jessie is able to put down Masquerade with Sfeel and its Ice Ball, but Sfeel is taken out by Pelipper's Steel Wing. Lileep is able to put down Pelipper with an Ancient Power, bringing an end to the double battle. Juan is impressed that Jessie was able to use Lileep to such avail, but Jessie thinks to herself she has to be careful. Though he doesn't know it, that was just dumb luck. She didn't know Lileep had the ability of Storm Drain. Jessie recalls Lileep to save it for later. Juan sends in his next Pokemon, Staryu. Jessie sends in Claydol. She knows that it's at a disadvantage, but she hopes that it'll be enough to take down Staryu. Though Claydol is tough, the type advantage is too much, and it falls to Staryu after causing minimal damage. Jessie then sends in Seviper. The Viper Pokemon does take a hit, but it manages to put the Star Pokemon down with the Poison Tail. Juan is down to 2 Pokemon, and decides to send in his Gorebyss. Jessie decides to leave in Seviper. The 2 Serpent Pokemon start the battle, but every time Jessie orders an attack, Gorebyss just dives into the water. This is frustrating Seviper, and Juan can see it, and he uses it to his advantage, continuing the same strategy, until Seviper gets fed up with the dodging and heads into the water after Gorebyss. Juan is surprised. He didn't think Seviper could swim. Jessie is just surprised, as she didn't either. But Seviper seems to have it down, and now that Gorebyss' advantage is gone, it's forced into an actual battle. But it's no pushover, and in the end, Seviper and Gorebyss collide with the Poison Tail and a Water Pulse that results in a mini explosion in the water. When the water settles, both Pokemon float to the surface, knocked out. Juan tells Jessie she is stronger than he gave her credit for. Her combinations have been that of a top coordinator, but his next Pokemon won't be a pushover, as he sends in his Milotic. Jessie has never seen a Milotic before. She wants to use X-Cloud, but flashes back to when it evolved, then she chooses to go with the safer option. She sends back in Lileep. Lileep is practically new, as it has recovered basically all the damage from its prior battle. But now that Juan knows it has the Storm Drain ability, he won't be using water moves. The battle starts. Jessie calls for an Ingrain, while Juan calls for a Twister. It is powerful, and you can tell that Lileep felt it. Jessie knows that Lileep took more damage than it got back with the Ingrain. She figures she won't be able to stall the battle out. Juan calls for another Twister, and Jessie counters it with an Ancient Power. It deflects the Twister somewhat, but Lileep still takes damage. She knows the next move will be Lileep's last. As Juan calls for another Twister, Jessie orders a Toxic. It connects, but so does the Twister, knocking out Lileep. Jessie is down to her final Pokemon, X-Cloud. Though it doesn't listen to her, if it can hold on long enough, then maybe Toxic can do its job. Jessie sends in X-Cloud. The Sound Pokemon stares down Milotic. Juan gives Jessie the first move. Jessie orders a Supersonic, but X-Cloud just stands there. So Juan orders a Water Pulse, and X-Cloud just takes it, like it's sizing up Milotic. Then it attacks with the Brick Break, repeatedly, with Milotic dotted each one. All the while, Toxic is taking effect more and more, and Jessie can see it. X-Cloud, frustrated, jumps into the water after Milotic, but it's pushed out when it gets caught in a Twister. When Milotic surfaces, Jessie can tell that it's losing health fast, and she thinks, almost there. But Juan calls for recovery. This catches Jessie off guard. Now Milotic has some of its health back, and this will make the battle last longer. Things are no longer in Jessie's favor. Jessie then orders another Supersonic, but X-Cloud uses Brick Break instead. Juan then orders a Hydro Pump. As it rushes in, Jessie orders X-Cloud to counter with the Brick Break, but it just stands there. But then it lets out a loud scream. It breaks through the Hydro Pump and connects with Milotic. Jessie pulls out her Pokédex and learns that the move was Hyper Voice. Now, Milotic is starting to feel the effects of toxic. Hoenn calls for another recovery, but it's not as effective. Jessie calls for another hyper voice, and to her surprise, Xploud listens. Hoenn tells Milotic to dive into the water, but it doesn't matter with the hyper voice cutting through the water, hitting Milotic. This is enough to force it out of the water and onto the land. Unfortunately, this is not enough to knock it out, and Hoenn calls for another recovery. But Milotic is moving slow, and Xploud rushes in to hit Milotic with a brick break that connects. But Jessie didn't order it. Milotic then falls to the poison. This isn't enough for Xploud, as it continues to attack Milotic until Jessie recalls it. Hoenn doesn't like the brutality of Xploud and tells Jessie she needs to train it better, as it is unsportsmanlike to attack an opponent that is already down. But even though Hoenn disapproves of how Jessie won, she still won, and he gives her the Rain Badge. Jessie apologizes for her Xploud and takes her leave. Later at the Pokemon Center, all Jessie can think about is how Xploud acted during the battle. She can't figure out. Sure, Loudred was always aggressive, but it listened. But now that it evolved, it refuses to even acknowledge her. Jessie doesn't know what to do but head to the next gym in Moss Deep City. So the next morning, she boards a boat, bound for there. Bound for there. Now, we pick up with James. He's been at sea for about a week now, and comes across one of the many islands in the Hoenn region that have been settled, and to his luck, there seems to be a contest hall here, and he chooses to enter. During James's time on the ocean, he focused on his training with Dusclops. James has learned that it enjoys putting on a show for people, and with its mischievous nature, it seeks as much attention from everyone that it can get. So James thought he would use it to his advantage, and surprisingly, it works. Him and Dusclops aren't in perfect sync, but it will at least listen to him. This allows James once again to make it to the finals, but his opponent here is May, and she is going for her 5th ribbon. This battle sees May use her Combuskin against James's Dusclops. James again fails to capture the ribbon, but he is liking the whole contest battling thing more and more. So now that James and Dusclops are somewhat in sync, James decides to head to Moss Deep City and the site of his 7th badge. Now, at last we switch over to Domino, hours ago. Maxie and his second-in-command Tabitha headed out several hours ago by helicopter. Their destination was Mount Pyre, so Domino decides to look around the Magma ship. Domino manages to gain access to the main lab. After a while of decrypting passwords and encrypted files, she manages to get in. But there is something odd about the files that she is viewing. They seem to be familiar. They are very similar to some of the research that Team Rocket was conducting at the Lake of Rage in Johto and in the Orange Islands. Domino thinks to herself, there's only one person this research can belong to. Namba. Then Domino clicks on a file marked Containment Alpha. She can't believe it. Domino then proceeds to download the files, just as she hears the door, and she takes cover. Someone walks in. It's Namba, and he's not alone. Maxie, Tabitha, and 2 familiar faces as well. Butch and Cassidy. Domino can't believe what she's seen. The 2 Team Rocket members here defected to the other side. This enrages Domino, but she is outnumbered and is forced to sneak away reluctantly. On her way out, she bumps into someone, an individual that doesn't seem to be in alliance with Team, but is dressed like them. Domino makes her escape, unsure what her next move is. We pick up with James arriving in Slateport City. He heads to the Pokemon Center, and upon entering, James is met with his old friend Jessie. The two get to talking, and Jessie asks James how many badges he has. James says 6. Jessie is relieved that her and James are equal, as the last time James had more badges than her. James then makes a suggestion to Jessie. They have a practice battle to get ready and warmed up for their next gym badge. Jessie likes this idea, and they head outside to the battlefield behind the Pokemon Center. They agree that'll be a 3-on-3 battle. James leads with his Medicham, and Jessie leads with Claydol. The two Pokemon enter battle, and they are evenly matched, and the two end up knocking each other out. Jessie tells James that he has gotten much stronger, while James tells Jessie it seems that she has her confidence back. Jessie then sends in Seviper. James remembers that Seviper and Zangoose are mortal enemy, so he sends in Zangoose. But this seems to be a mistake, as the two Pokemon have such a deep-rooted hatred for each other that they won't listen to Jessie or James, and as a result, they have to recall the two Pokemon, because all they do is attack each other without any orders or stopping. Then, out of slight desperation and wanting to prove her power, Jessie decides to send in Exploud. Knowing that Exploud won't listen to her, she hopes that Exploud is at least strong enough to win her the battle, hoping that she can try and make some progress in its training here. James commends Jessie on evolving Exploud and tells her we'll match her power, and sends in Lairon, but quickly becomes apparent that Jessie can't control Exploud, and James is onto this. It attacks Lairon relentlessly, and Jessie tries to recall it, but Exploud refuses to return. James realizes that the only way to end this is going to have to be to knock out Exploud. But Lairon has taken a lot of damage because of Exploud's brick breaks. James calls to Lairon to hold on. He knows that he can win this. Just then, Lairon starts to grow, and it lets out a loud roar as it evolves into Aggron. James is so excited. He was wondering if Lairon would ever evolve, but his excitement is short-lived as Exploud attacks without an order. James orders Aggron to counter with the Rock Tomb. This traps Exploud, and then James orders a Double Edge. This is enough to knock down Exploud and give Jessie enough time to recall it. Aggron stands victorious, and James is excited. Aggron lets out a loud roar as it establishes dominance. James then recalls Aggron and approaches Jessie. She says, "Sorry about that. Ever since Exploud evolved, it has been uncontrollable, and it seems to be getting worse." Then James tries to say something, but is interrupted by two different voices. Then these two kids approach Jessie and James. They introduce themselves as Liza and Tate, the gym leader of Slateport City. James says, "Great, we are here to challenge the gym anyway." Liza tells James that they saw their whole battle, and though the last two battles didn't play out that well, during the first battle between Medicham and Claydol, they seem to counter each other like Jessie and James have known each other for years. Jessie says, "That's cause we have." Tate says, "Great, then why don't we make the gym battle a battle of intensity? You see, here in our gym, normally the challengers have to battle us in a double battle to earn the badge, but I see a unique opportunity here. You two versus us two, and if you both can beat us, then you'll both get a badge." James welcomes this challenge, and so does Jessie, even though her problems with Exploud are freshly in her mind. They all agree to the terms of the battle and part ways. That night, Jessie and James spend all their time strategizing for their upcoming battle. The next morning, Jessie and James head to the gym. Liza and Tate greet them, and they tell them that they are excited at the prospect of a double battle with two other trainers, as it's something they don't normally do. The double duo head inside and get to work. Liza and Tate lead with their trademark Pokemon, Lunatone and Solrock. After asking around last night, James had learned that they were a psychic-type gym who uses Solrock and Lunatone, so he and Jessie had decided to craft their strategy to counter them. Jessie sends in Lileep, and James sends in Dusclops. Jessie starts with an Ingrain to engage with their stall strategy, while James orders a Shadow Punch. This combination is less than impressive. Liza and Tate easily counter it. They fire back with a Psychic and Flamethrower, alone both aimed for Lileep. Both attacks hit, and Lileep is severely damaged. But then James orders Dusclops to strike, and it fires a Shadow Ball, which connects with Lunatone and sends it flying in the direction of Lileep. Then Jessie orders Lileep to use Mega Drain, which connects, healing almost all of its damage. That's when Liza and Tate realize Jessie and James baited them. They wanted Liza and Tate to focus on Lileep's setup, as it would be extremely difficult to knock it out if it got set up. That way, Dusclops could strike. They commend Jessie and James on their little technique, but declare it won't happen again. The battle commences, and Liza and Tate are in perfect unison, and they choose to focus on Dusclops because Lileep has regained all of its health. But Jessie and James start the next plan. While Dusclops is getting double teamed, it is a ghost type, so the damage is minimum and it is rather tanky. James orders Dusclops to grab Solrock, and then Tate, in response, orders a Solar Beam. As Solrock charges the Solar Beam, Dusclops rushes towards Lileep. Then, right when Solrock gets ready to fire the Solar Beam, Dusclops throws Solrock at Lileep. Tate orders Solrock to fire at Dusclops, but James counters it with a Shadow Ball. The two moves collide and create an explosion, but Solrock hits the leap, and Laleep is able to hit it with a Toxic. Liza capitalizes on this and orders a Side Beam on Dusclops. Jessie counters it with an Ancient Power, and James orders a Will-O-Wisp on Lunatone. Lunatone is now burned, and Solrock is poisoned. Liza and Tate are on the clock. This is what Jessie and James wanted, but it came at a cost. Dusclops is tired, and James can see it. James orders a Shadow Punch on Lunatone, but it dodges it and uses Psychic. Dusclops is hit, then Solrock follows it up with a Flamethrower. This is not enough to knock out Dusclops, but one more move will take it down. But Solrock and Lunatone are starting to feel the effects of the burn and the poison, and Laleep fires an Ancient Power that connects with Lunatone. This is enough to knock it out. Solrock then fires a Flamethrower at Laleep, but Dusclops gets in the way and fires a Shadow Punch. The two move hit each Pokemon. Solrock is still up, but Dusclops falls. Now, Laleep is left to face Solrock. It fires another Ancient Power, as it is locked into place by the Ingreen. Solrock is getting tired from the battle, and Tate can see it. He then orders Solrock to use Explosion, as if they can't win, then neither will they. But as the dust clears, Solrock is knocked out and Laleep stands. At the last minute, Jessie called for Protect, eliminating any damage and winning the match for Jessie and James, earning both Jessie and James the Mind Badge. Liza and Tate congratulate Jessie and James on the battle well fought. They then head back to the Pokemon Center. Later that night, both Jessie and James are talking over their next moves. Jessie's next stop is Fort Tree City, while James is in Sootopolis. Then they get a call on their Pokédex, which is strange. They didn't even know that it had these functions. It's Domino, and she needs their help. Team Magma and Aqua have mobilized, and they are in the final phases of their plans. Jessie and James's destination is Monsoon Island. There, Team Magma and Aqua have agreed to meet and make some sort of trade. And Domino informs them that it seems that Butch and Cassidy and Dr. Namba have joined the side of Team Magma. Domino tells them it's urgent and they need to hurry. Jessie fills James in on everything that's been happening and how Butch and Cassidy were demoted. James says this explains why Butch acted the way he did on Mount Pyre. The two set out the next day at the first chance they get. It takes 2 days to get there by boat. The night of the first day, Jessie and James have to stop on an island so that they can camp. They decide to let all of their Pokemon out from their Pokeballs, and Exploud and Aggron start to attack each other. Exploud uses Hyper Voice, and it hits Aggron, knocking it into deep water. James starts to panic and jumps in after it, but then Aggron starts to swim back to shore. It seems to have some sort of a resistance to water. Aggron then gets back to land and attacks Exploud. The two battle, heavily destroying most of the beach. It does not go unnoticed. From the shadows, they are attacked from multiple angles. Jessie and James think they are surrounded. Is it Team Aqua or Team Magma? But no humans appear. This goes on for hours until sunrise. Now that they have light, Jessie spots a Pokemon, and it's fast, attacking them from all over. James orders Metajam to use Psychic, but it has no effect. Jessie then sends Seviper after it, and after some chasing, Seviper finally catches up with it and has coiled around it. Jessie pulls out her Pokédex, and it's revealed to be an Absol, the Pokemon that is said to appear when great disasters are going to happen. Jessie wants to catch it. The way it moves and its evasiveness is something she needs on her team. With a Razor Wind, Absol breaks free from Seviper. Seviper goes after it, and Jessie orders a Poison Tail, and it connects. But Absol uses a Shadow Ball in response that connects with Seviper. Jessie then orders a Dig, and Absol tries to get away, but Seviper catches it and hits it with the Poison Fang. It puts Absol down, and Jessie throws a Pokeball and catches it. Now that Jessie has added Absol to her team, the two head out for Monsoon Island. When Jessie and James arrive on the island, they meet up with Domino. She fills them in on everything. But off the shore of the island, Kyogre and Groudon are battling. James notices Pikachu on the head of Groudon and asks about it. Domino says she doesn't know, but their business is on Team Magma and Aqua's ships. Domino heads to Team Aqua's ship, and Jessie and James heads to Team Magma's. Jessie and James head into the Magma ship, and once inside, they are met by Butch, Cassidy, and Namba. Jessie tells Cassidy she knew something was up. They were working for Team Magma the whole time. Cassidy says, actually, this was only a recent decision. We were tired of the disrespect we were getting in Team Rocket, so we decided to join the winning team. Now, over with Domino, she has entered the Aqua ship, and after looking around, she is met by someone she is all too familiar with, the Iron Mask Marauder and his Flygon. He has become an enforcer for Team Aqua, and Alright, so we're picking back up with Jessie and James as they're facing off with Butch and Cassidy, and as well, Dr. Namba. The animosity has grown to a peak with these two duos. Butch and Cassidy are fed up with the mistreatment that they're getting from Team Rocket, that they've been shown with the favoritism towards Jessie and James lately. And Jessie and James are tired of living in Butch and Cassidy's shadow, and more so, they're tired of being mistreated by the duo. Too long in the ranks of Team Rocket have Jessie and James been under their heel. They want to resolve this now, and they also view Butch and Cassidy as traitors to Team Rocket, so they aim to bring them in for judgment on the behalf of Giovanni. But of course, Butch and Cassidy aren't going to go without a fight. Cassidy tells Jessie she intends to make sure that she doesn't leave here today. Butch echoes that sentiment, telling James that they're going to relieve them of all their Pokemon. Jessie and James tell them that they're going to be the ones who lose. Butch and Cassidy both send out some old friends of Jessie and James, Arbok and Weezing, as well as Numel and Breloom. Butch and Cassidy both give them the orders to attack Jessie and James, but the four Pokemon, they're hesitant. They don't want to attack their trainers. These were the trainers that had caught them. These were the trainers that put the time in with them, and these trainers are the ones they actually care for. They refuse to take the orders from Butch and Cassidy. Butch and Cassidy make their usual threat, putting them back inside their Pokeball. But still, this doesn't work. They refuse to take orders, and they actually choose to switch sides back to Jessie and James to oppose Butch, Cassidy, and Namba. James smugly says, see, even though you took those Pokemon from us, they're still loyal to us because we treat them right. We don't treat them like tools. We treat them like the partners that they are. But Butch and Cassidy do still have one Pokemon on their side, and they send out their Mightyena. Jessie, super overconfident, says, your one Pokemon against our four? I highly doubt you'd stand a chance against this. But to make sure that you have no chance at all, why don't we make the odds a little bit more in our favor? James seconds this sentiment, and he sends out Zangoose, and Jessie sends out Sevipe. The two Pokemon eye each other with the intention of fighting, but Jessie and James quickly snap at them, telling them that there is something more important. They need to take out the two, Butch and Cassidy. With that being said, both Zangoose and Seviper put their differences aside, and they're focused on taking out the opposition. But then, as the battle gets ready to start, you just hear a maniacal laughing coming from behind Butch and Cassidy. It's Namba. He is just laughing to himself, and James thinks, this guy's gone crazy. Why is he laughing so hard to himself? Then Namba finally speaks. He tells Jessie and James, what, you think that this was in your favor the whole time? I know about your gym challenge, and I know about your use of the Pokédex. And you know something? Those Pokédex were designed by me with features that I installed. Jessie says, so what does that mean? He goes, it's quite simple. I developed those Pokédexes to keep track of any Pokemon that were caught by Team Rocket, but it was designed using technology that I built. Do you guys remember our experiment at the Lake of Rage in Johto? How we were forcing Magikarp to evolve to try and control them? Even though that experiment failed, it did give us some promising results. And after some fine-tuning and modifications, I was able to greatly increase and improve the technology that we used at the Lake of Rage. Improve it so far as to compact it in something small, like a Pokédex. Jessie then thinks to herself, no, it can't be. Jessie says, that part of the Pokédex that no one can access, that has hidden files in it, that was you? Namba says, oh, so you're familiar with my work. Well, let me show you exactly what it does. Then Namba pulls out a receiver and flips a switch. The switch begins to send out a radio frequency throughout the ship, and it doesn't affect Mightyena, but it affects all of the Pokemon that are on Jessie and James' side. Seviper, Zangoose, Breloom, Arbok, Weezing, and Numel, all of them with their eyes glowing red, turn to face Jessie and James with hostility in their eyes. They aim to attack them. Namba begins laughing maniacally again. You see, any Pokemon that was caught by a trainer using my Pokédex, they were instantly registered and synced with this energy wave that I've developed. So now, no matter what, all of your Pokemon are ours, and there's nothing you can do about it. Jessie and James refuse to believe this. James tries to reach his Pokemon, and Jessie tries to reach hers, with no avail. Nothing can get through. They don't understand what's going on. Just a moment ago, all of these Pokemon wanted to fight with them, and now they view them as enemies. James refused to accept this, so he sent out his Cacnea, and the moment it's let out of the ball, its eyes too begin to glow red, and it turns and faces them with hostility. He then sends out Masquerain, Dusclops, and Medicham. All two have their eyes glow red and turn to face Jessie and James with hostility. James can't believe it. All of his Pokemon, every one of them, are against him. No matter what he tries, all of his pleas fall on deaf ears. James then tries his last one, Aggron. This was a huge mistake. As soon as it's let out of its ball, it too begins to glow with red eyes, but it is far more hostile than the other Pokemon. Because of its power, it immediately starts thrashing about, attacking towards Jessie and James without a command. Jessie sees this coming, so she immediately sends out Exploud, hoping that at least it'll be able to counter its power. But Exploud is of no help. It too is caught by the wave and begins thrashing about with its power. Namba, maniacally laughing, tells him, see, I told you guys, any Pokemon caught by someone who has my Pokédex will be under my control. You have no way to fight back here. There's nothing you can do. You might as well just hand over your last Pokemon and leave. There's no way you could win. Jessie thinks to herself, there's gotta be a way. This cannot be the end. But then she thinks for a second. She had Watt disable that part of her Pokedex at a certain point, which means some of her Pokemon may not be affected. James is screaming at Jessie, we have to get out of here. Jessie, we need to move now. There's nothing we can do. We have to regroup and try and find a way to put these guys down. Jessie says, hold on, James. I think I have an idea. Jessie throws her remaining 3 Pokeballs. Out pops Feel, Claydol, and Absol, but they're not affected by the wave. Jessie was right. She had that part of the Pokedex disabled, so these 3 Pokemon will be unaffected by the waves. Jessie says, well, it's not much, but it's the best we got. James then makes a mistake, thinking that he also has a Pokemon that may be unaffected, and sends out Masquerain, but it too has its eyes glow red and becomes affected by the waves. James says, I don't understand. How come your 3 Pokemon are affected but mine aren't? Jessie, ordering attacks from her 3 Pokemon to block the attacks coming in from the other ones, tells James, I had that part of my Pokedex disabled when I was in Mauville City, so those 3 Pokemon are the only 3 that we got. We have to use them and figure out a way around this. We have no choice. Otherwise, Namba, Butch, and Cassidy are going to win, and Team Magma is going to be able to accomplish their goals. Our job as Team Rocket members is to make sure that that does not happen. Now, we flash over to Domino and the Iron Mask Marauder on the Team Aqua ship. Domino has her back to the wall as the Iron Mask Marauder and Flygon are approaching her. She tries to radio for help from Jessie and James, but all she gets is static on the line. She says, great. This isn't good. How am I going to get out of this? The Iron Mask Marauder gives Domino one chance. He says join him. He'll put a good word in with her for Team Aqua, and they can be the muscle for Team Aqua, acquiring resources for them. They do pay quite well, actually. Domino says thanks, but she knows where her loyalty lies. And with that, she throws Dustox's ball and calls upon it, hoping that it'll be able to put up a fight against the Flygon. But as soon as it emerges from its ball, its eyes begin glowing red, and then it takes off. It's like it's being drawn somewhere. Domino doesn't understand, and now she realizes that she truly is alone. As the Iron Mask Marauder orders Flygon to attack, Domino does her best to defend and dodge. With Flygon firing Hyper Beam after Hyper Beam, it's tearing through the ship, and Domino is using the holes in the ship to get away. When they finally come to a room, this room seems to be a containment room for something of some kind, but she doesn't know what it is. Flygon comes tearing through with another Hyper Beam, while the Iron Mask Marauder is right behind him. This Hyper Beam hits the control panel on the containment unit, and the containment unit immediately starts to short circuit, and then there is a huge explosion that catches Domino, the Iron Mask Marauder, and Flygon. Once the smoke starts to settle and they can actually see what's going on, there's a Pokemon inside. And as the smoke clears, this Pokemon lets out a loud roar. Domino doesn't know what it is, but the Iron Mask Marauder says, ah, an Armaldo. That's what they had locked. Interesting. Domino thinks to herself, Armaldo, but she has no time to react. The Armaldo immediately starts to try to attack the 3. It is extremely upset for being locked away in that containment unit. It's like it was being experimented on by Team Aqua. When it realizes that it cannot catch Domino because of her small size, it immediately goes after Flygon, and the 2 Pokemon battle it out right there on the ship, tearing it apart even more than Flygon was by itself. They refuse to give up, firing Hyper Beam after Hyper Beam at each other. It's gotten to the point to where the ship has started taking on water. Domino realizes that she has to get out of here. She doesn't know what happened to Dustox, and this Armaldo seems to be focused on battling as much as it can. She has to use this to her advantage. With that, Domino tries to make her escape from the Iron Mask Marauder, but he refuses to let her get away. He tells Domino he will be turning her into his employers for a nice bonus, so it doesn't matter what she tries, she won't be getting out of here. The Iron Mask Marauder then sends out a second Pokemon, Pelipper, and this Pelipper too seems to be of a higher level than normal, and with it, the Iron Mask Marauder orders Water Gun and a Water Pulse, trying to stop Domino, but Domino is successful in dodging. She doesn't know what to do. Her back is to the wall, and she doesn't really have many options. But as she is cornered by the Pelipper, Flygon and Armaldo come tearing through a wall, knocking into both of them, rolling into another room. The Iron Mask Marauder is also caught in this and taken with him, but he does drop a couple of things on the way out. 3 Dark Balls. Domino sees this and immediately knows what they are. She's hoping that these are the balls for Pelipper and Flygon. She grabs the 3 balls and she immediately runs to the room and she starts trying to return them. The first one doesn't work, but the second one manages to return the Flygon, and the third one manages to return the pillow. That just leaves Armaldo. Armaldo is on a tear, and it sees the Iron Mask Marauder and immediately tries to attack it. The Iron Mask Marauder sees this coming and reaches for his balls, but when he realizes that he's lost all of them due to being caught in the fight with the Pokemon, he immediately tries to make his escape. He is able to get through a doorway that is too small for Armaldo to get through. With no other targets, Armaldo turns his attention to Domino. Domino nervously looks at the bug rock Pokemon. She knows that it aims to attack her, but she has no choice. She hopes that this last Dark Ball is just a spare, and as Armaldo runs toward her, she throws it at it, and it hits it. Then with 1, 2, 3, the ball stops shaking, just in the nick of time too, as water floods into the room. Domino grabs the last Dark Ball, and she heads for the doorway, making her escape off the sinking ship. Back outside, as Domino gets off the ship onto the island, the battle rages on with Kyogre and Groudon. Weather has become a destructive force, the sun shining super bright, burning the earth as torrential rains pour down, putting out fires and drowning land masses. The island seems to be getting smaller with the increased water that is being poured. Domino knows that something has to be done. She can see off in the distance a Dragonite and a red Gyarados doing their best to try and quell the fighting, while a familiar Pikachu is helping Groudon battle Kyogre. She looks over to the Team Magma ship. She knows Jessie and James are there, and the fact that they didn't answer their comms means that they're in trouble. She immediately heads for the ship. Back inside, Jessie is doing her best to fend off all of the Pokemon. Cassidy, now overconfident, also sends out her Tropius. All of these Pokemon are taking orders from Namba, Butch, and Cassidy, and all Jessie and James have is just Feel, which prefers to play more than battle, Claydol, which has good defense, but is running on empty, and Laleep, which unfortunately isn't as mobile as the other two, and Absol, which is doing its best to dodge attacks, but all 4 of them are getting tired. And Jessie is at her wit's end. She doesn't know what else she can do. These Pokemon are all attacking relentlessly without holding anything back, and James, due to the lack of not having anything, has begun to crumble under the pressure. He doesn't know what to do. There's no way for him to help. All he can do is just sit there and watch as Jessie does her best to fend off the horde of Pokemon that they used to call friends. And slowly, one by one, each of Jessie's Pokemon drop. First Lily, then Spheal, then Claydol, with just Absol left to protect them. Absol is doing its best, and Jessie is giving command after command, but unfortunately, Absol too gets overwhelmed by the crowd of Pokemon, and it too falls. Butch and Cassidy are super pleased with themselves. The two didn't think that it would be this easy to put their enemies down, but they won't be letting Jessie and James leave here. With one final command, they give the order for all of the Pokemon to attack, and all of the former friends of Jessie and James attack them with all of their combined attacks all at once to try and end the duo. Jessie and James look to each other. They realize that they had a good run, but they didn't want it to end like this. Just then, Dustox comes flying through, looking for the source of the signal, trying to join the fight. Unfortunately, it ends up taking the brunt of the attacks, getting knocked out, severely injured. Jessie looks to Dustox. If it's out of the ball, that means that Domino can't be far behind. And sure enough, she was right, because moments later, Domino appears as the group of Pokemon get ready to launch their next attack. Domino tells Butch and Cassidy to stand down, or she will be forced to act. Butch and Cassidy simply laugh at her. What are you gonna do? You don't have any Pokemon. That is well known throughout Team Rocket. There's no fight that you can put up against us. Domino, with a smile on her face, says, really? You think so? Even though in the back of her mind she thinks, I hope this works. She pulls out the 3 Dark Balls that she got from the Iron Mask Marauder, and she sends them out. Out pop Flygon, Pelipper, and Armaldo. They all let out a loud roar, and they look back at Domino. Domino looks at them and says, listen, your master, he abandoned you. I am your new master now, and I will not. But you will do as I say. This horde of Pokemon is a threat to me, and therefore a threat to you. Your orders are simple. Take them down. Flygon, Armaldo, and Pelipper all look at each other. They're kind of shocked with what's going on. This human seems so sure of herself, and the Iron Mask Marauder was not the one to release them from their ball. They start to question the whole vitality of the situation, but when the horde of Pokemon decides to try to attack again, that's when they know what she speaks is the truth. So the 3 Pokemon then go into battle. At this point, it doesn't matter what she says is true or not. What matters is that these guys are attacking them, so they need to defend themselves. So the 3 high-level Dark Ball Pokemon begin to defend themselves, and by extension, defending Domino. While Domino thinks to herself, I didn't think that would work, but I'm glad it did. She then asks Jessie and James what's going on, and Jessie debriefs her. She says that Namba used the technology from the Lake of Rage to develop better technology and hide it inside of the Pokédexes. All of the Pokemon that they caught are now under their control. We have to fry the transmitter in order to stop this, or else all those Pokemon are just going to keep coming at us. Domino says, I got it, but I need you guys to cause a distraction. Jessie turns to James and slaps him across the face to snap him out of his funk. James then looks at Jessie and asks if she has a plan. Jessie says, who better than getting in the way than us two? James says, you know, you're right. So while the distraction of the groups of Pokemon are fighting, Jessie and James make their way around, immediately going after Butch and Cassidy, drawing the attention of Butch and Cassidy and Namba towards them, and they immediately try to attack Butch and Cassidy, but are met with Mightyena and Tropius. These two actually belong to Butch and Cassidy and will not let their masters be hurt. Namba is standing behind them, laughing maniacally. You really thought that would work? You really thought you'd be able to get through our defenses to try and stop us? You two are dumber than you look. Just then, from behind Namba, the receiver is hit with the Black Rose that sends out a bolt of electricity, frying the entire system. Namba can't believe it. He turns around and Domino is there. He had forgotten all about her. The distraction of Jessie and James worked. And they tell Namba, you're right, we are dumb. Who better to run a distraction on you two while somebody else does the work? And with the transmitter being fried, all of the Pokemon that were under the control of the Namba wave stop fighting. Out of confusion, they're all wondering where they're at, except for one, Exploud. Exploud is still angry. Remember, it listens to no one, and it refused to call anyone its master. It begins to run a rampage, attacking anyone and anything in sight. And when it hits a control panel that explodes, it causes a chain reaction to set off throughout the Magma ship, and all of the technology that Namba had developed here is also caught in the explosion. But this explosion also causes this ship to start to sink as well. Jessie and James begin returning their 6 Pokemon to their Pokeballs, but there's a problem. Butch and Cassidy have the Pokeballs for Arbok, Weezing, Numel, and Breloom. They have to get them back. Jessie and James turn to Domino. They tell her they have to pursue Butch and Cassidy. They have to get the Pokeballs back for their Pokemon. Domino says, fine, you guys do what you have to, but I'm getting off this ship. Domino then returns her 3 Pokemon back to the Dark Balls, and she returns Dustox as well. She then says, listen, I'll take your Pokemon with me to get off the ship. You two do what you have to. Jessie orders Arbok to follow her, and James orders Breloom to come with him. Domino takes the remaining Pokemon out with her as Jessie and James pursue Butch and Cassidy. They head deep into the ship, trying to find out where the two have gone, when they come to an underwater bay that's at the bottom of the ship. Unfortunately, Butch and Cassidy have made their escape with Namba in a submarine that Team Magma had. That's it. They've lost. They don't have any chance of getting back the Pokeballs for their Pokemon. What are they going to do now? They need those balls in order to return their Pokemon. Jessie and James have a moment of despair, but when they realize that they have to get out of the ship, Jessie orders Arbok to use a dig, and it does so, heading straight to the side, creating an opening, and water flushing in. James yells at Jessie, telling her, well, that was a smart thing. What do you expect us to do now? Jessie says, it's easy. We need this room to fill up with water faster. That way the pressure will equalize and we can get out. We're too deep in the ship to make it back to the top. We just have to wait. So with that, the room fills up rather quick, and the two make their escapes with their Pokemon. Once they hit the surface, they get back on the island and meet with Domino. Domino asks if they were successful in retrieving what they were after. Jessie just puts her head to the ground and says no. James too is upset about this. They got their Pokemon back, but they have no way to really use them in battle or take them with them because they have no Pokeballs to keep them in. They don't know what they will do. Meanwhile, all of the fighting has subsided. Ash and his friends, as well as Lance, the Dragon Master, were able to quell the fighting between Groudon and Kyogre. And now that the two have given up on their quarrel with each other, they return to their respective resting places, away from humanity. The remnants of Team Aqua and Team Magma scattered to the 4 winds of Hoenn. There is nothing left. Jessie and James were successful in their quest to end Team Aqua and Team Magma. Domino is extremely grateful that those two were able to aid her. She was unsure if she was able to do it by herself, but now they have a more pressing matter. Arbok, Weezing, Breloom, and Numel. What to do with them? After some thinking, Domino makes the suggestion. She's going to head back to the Mount Chimney base where Meowth is, so that way she can debrief Giovanni and come up with a new plan to find Butch, Cassidy, Namba, and the Iron Mask Marauder, as Giovanni still hasn't given up interest in dealing out their punishments. She tells Jessie and James that she will have the 4 Pokemon shipped to the Mount Chimney base, and she will keep them there until they are able to retrieve their Pokeballs. Though Jessie and James don't like this, as they will be unable to use these Pokemon, it is the best course of action. At least the Pokemon themselves will be safe until they are able to get back the balls. With that, Jessie and James now have to decide what they're going to do. After all, they were taking the gym challenge, but their cover for taking the gym challenge was that they were supposed to end Team Aqua and Team Magma. Now that they've ended it, technically, they're supposed to go back with Domino. There's a moment of silence as Jessie and James both realize this. Domino turns to the two. And without them saying a word, she says, listen, technically Butch and Cassidy, the Iron Mask Marauder, and Nambar are still out there. So I don't see any harm in you guys going to search for them. And if it just so happens that you have to challenge a couple of gyms along the way and take on the Pokemon League, then that's what it is. Jessie and James look at Domino. Without saying a word, they just give her a smile and they part ways as Domino makes the call for support from Mount Chimney Base to come and pick her and the Pokemon up. Jessie and James have to decide where they're going. James, it's simple. He's got one badge left, so he's going to head to Sootopolis City. While Jessie, well, it's pretty simple as well, because she only has one badge left. She has to head to Fort Tree City. With that, the two friends say their goodbyes, and they part ways. Jessie catching a boat to Lily Cove, and James catching a boat to Sootopolis City. It takes Jessie a couple of weeks, but she eventually makes it to Fort Tree City. Along the way, she's been putting in a lot of training. She's been desperately trying to earn the trust of Exploud, but it is met with consistent failure, to the point to where she almost wants to give up on it and just release it. She doesn't really know what more she can do. But when she reached the Fort Tree Gym, she's met with Winona, the flying type expert, and she declares that she is here for a battle. Winona is more than happy to meet Jessie with this, as she is obligated to by the Pokemon League rules. The two head into the gym, and Winona informs Jessie that it'll be a 3-on-3 battle, and Jessie can change out as she wishes, but Winona will not be able to, and the battle will be over when either side is all out of Pokemon. Jessie agrees to this, and they take their positions on the battlefield. Winona immediately sends out her Altaria. Jessie pulls out her Pokedex, and once she gets the data on it, she realizes that Altaria is an ice dragon type. She knows just who she has to use against it. Jessie sends in her Spheal. Jessie's hoping that Spheal's ice typing will give her the advantage over the flying dragon, and it does prove to be somewhat successful. Altaria has to get in close because its long range attacks can't really hit Spheal. Spheal's body is a perfect sphere, and it allows it to really bounce and move around the battlefield with little effort. As a result, whenever Altaria comes in for an attack, Spheal is able to get in a nice ice ball, and unfortunately these ice balls get stronger with each successive attack, and it is able to land 3 of them in total, back to back, taking Altaria down. Winona compliments Jessie. She didn't think that this little Spheal and its erratic movements across the battlefield would be able to take out the Altaria, but Winona isn't going to give up yet, and she sends in her second Pokemon, her Skarmory. Unfortunately for Spheal, Skarmory does have the type advantage, and with a Steel Wing and an Aerial Ace, it falls to Skarmory. Jessie isn't really flustered by this though. She knew that Winona would be a hard battle. James told her so and gave her a little bit of insight on the Pokemon that he faced, but she still has to formulate a plan. She doesn't really have anything with a type advantage against Skarmory, but she does kind of have an ace in her sleeve. So this may seem a little crazy, she thinks to herself, but she sends it to Seviper. Winona is kind of caught off guard by this. She says, Seviper, why would you send in a poison type to fight a steel type? Poison types have no effect against steel types. Jessie says, listen, let me worry about the details of that. Let's just get this battle started. Winona says, alright, it's your funeral, and the battle gets underway. Winona orders Aerial Ace and Steel Wings to try and attack Seviper, but Jessie is able to successfully dodge them with Dig, causing Winona and Skarmory to get a little bit flustered. And because she's been using Dig, it's creating random holes throughout the battlefield, allowing Seviper places to hide, and this is exactly what Jessie was going for. Each time Skarmory would come down for an Aerial Ace or a Steel Wing, Jessie would order Seviper into one of the holes, and once Skarmory would fly over another one, Seviper would catch it off guard with a new move that Jessie had been working with it, Flamethrower. Even though Seviper is a poison type, Flamethrower is a fire type move, and it's super effective against Skarmory. This game of Pokemon Whack-A-Mole ends up giving Jessie the advantage, and Seviper is able to take down Skarmory in the end after being caught with the Flamethrower. Winona is impressed. She didn't think that a Seviper would be able to take out a steel type like Skarmory. She commends Jessie on a job well done, but she still has one more Pokemon to go through, and Winona sends out her Pelipper. This Pelipper is easily able to put down Seviper by flooding the holes with water guns when Seviper would retreat into them, causing Seviper not to be able to dodge the damage and eventually getting taken out. Jessie didn't think that water gun could be used as a counter like that, but it's alright. This is her final gym badge, and she doesn't intend to choke. With that, she pulls out a Pokeball and looks at it. You're the only one of my Pokemon that hasn't been in a gym battle yet, and I'm hoping your speed is good enough to keep up with this bird Pokemon. And with that, Jessie sends in Absol. This battle is one of interesting, because Pelipper has the advantage of being able to take into the sky, but Jessie sees the point of opportunity. The pillars that line the battlefield, Jessie can take advantage of them, and she orders Absol to do so. This allows Absol to get up high to attack Pelipper with its air cut better. This battle does come down to the wire, with Pelipper able to hit Absol with an aerial ace and water gun, causing a lot of damage. But during the battle, Absol does learn a new technique. After watching Pelipper use its aerial ace, it begins to use it on its own without any help from Jessie. And once Jessie realizes what the move is, she's impressed. Absol is a quick study. It wasn't something she was expecting of the Pokemon because she hasn't had a lot of time with it. It learned a new move in the midst of battle that it normally can't learn on its own. This Pokemon is very special, she thinks to herself, but she uses it to her advantage and uses Razor Wind to draw Pelipper in close and then to end it with an aerial ace. The aerial ace connects, putting Pelipper into the ground, earning Jessie her 8th badge of the Hoenn region. Jessie is super excited. She has actually earned the right to challenge the Lily of the Valley Conference. Winona, when presenting Jessie with the badge, congratulates her and asks how many more badges she has. Jessie tells her, none. You were in my 8th gym badge, and I'm glad that it was you. Everything that I've been through to this point has shown that I have what it takes to compete in the big leagues. Winona is super pleased that Jessie was able to earn her 8th badge with her. And with that, Jessie then returns to the rocket base on Mount Chimney to see if there's been any progress in tracking Butch, Cassidy, Namba, or the Iron Mask Marauder. Now, we're going to swap over to James and his adventures in Sootopolis City. It didn't take him quite as long to reach Sootopolis as it took Jessie to reach Fort Tree City because it was fairly close to the island where they were having their battle with Team Aqua and Team Magma. So, it only took him a few days. Once he arrives, he immediately heads for the gym. He is anxious to earn his 8th badge. He never thought he would actually be challenging a Pokemon League before. And the fact that he is ready to earn his 8th badge has got him super psyched up. Once he gets inside, he is met with Hoenn, the gym leader. And Hoenn is a very, very flamboyant individual. So much so that it catches James's attention. Hoenn happens to mention that he is a former winner of the Hoenn Grand Festival, and he has achieved the title of Master Coordinator. And now he runs the Sootopolis gym. This catches James' attention. He is very interested. Someone who has won the Grand Festival and earned the title of Master Coordinator is now a gym leader. James is intrigued by this. He wants this battle even more now. He wants to know what a Master Coordinator who runs a gym can do. Once they go over the rules, it's the same as when Jessie battled. It's going to be a 2-on-2 tag team, and once James can get through that, then they will move on to the final 3, 5 Pokemon total. James can switch out at any point, but Hoenn cannot. And with that, the two take their positions on the battlefield. Hoenn decides to lead with his Wish Cache and his Seeking. Unfortunately, James doesn't have any water types to speak of, so he's going to have to make do with what he's got. But he does have an idea, and he sends in Cacnea and Masquerain. The double battle between the duo gets underway, and it is quite fierce. James is caught up a little bit by the elegance of the moves that Hoenn does, so much so that it ends up costing his Pokemon some HP and taking the hits just because James is caught off guard and not calling for responses. Hoenn tells James that if he has interest in being a coordinator, he's going to have to do much better than that. He needs to figure out how he can combo his attacks in his favor. With that ringing in James's ears, he then begins to formulate a plan. You see, Wishcast and Seeking, they're attacking in formation, using Seeking and its horn to draw the attention of their opponents, and then Wishcast following up with a powerful attack. James knows that this is his time to strike, so with that, he orders Cacnea and Masquerain to line up the same as they do when they come in. Hoenn then orders a Water Pulse from Seeking, which charges through, then followed by a second Water Pulse with Wishcash, the two backing each other up. James orders Cacnea to use Needle Arm to knock both of the attacks away, and then orders it to fire a Pin Missile as the two are still charging in. But he orders Masquerain to power up the Pin Missile with the Gust, and as the Gust catches the Pin Missile in its breeze, it speeds towards the two Pokemon, catching Hoenn off guard, as they are too fast to dodge. The Pin Missiles hit with direct damage on the two Pokemon, knocking them both out simultaneously. Hoenn is impressed. He didn't think that James had it in him to come up with a combination like that. James is astounded as well, because he didn't think it was going to work, but it did work, and it came at a cost. Cacnea and Masquerain are extremely tired. They took a lot of damage, and he doesn't know if they're going to be able to go on. So he recalls both of them right now to try and save them for later. He does have the numbers advantage, but his Pokemon did take a severe beating. Hoenn then chooses to go with his Love Disc. Love Disc is a super fast Pokemon, and James can see it just by the way it zips around the room. He knows that he's going to need something to match its speed. So he sends in Zangoose. The two Pokemon get underway, and the battle gets intense, with them attacking rapidly, Hoenn firing a Water Pulse and trying to use the track. Fortunately for James, he knows exactly what's going on, and Zangoose is able to dodge both attacks. Then James orders Zangoose to rebuttal with the Shockwave, which caught Hoenn off guard, and it does catch Love Disc. It does take a lot of damage, but it's not enough to put Love Disc down. James then orders Zangoose to rush in with a quick attack, and to try and finish it off with a Crush Claw. As Zangoose gets in close, Love Disc fires off a Water waterfalls at point blank range, catching both the Pokemon. When the water and the steam settle, both Pokemon lay unconscious. Not exactly what James wanted, but it gets him one step closer to being able to earn his 8th badge. With that, they both recall their Pokemon. Juan is impressed. His Zangoose was tougher than he thought it would be, but that does not matter. Juan is still a formidable trainer. James does have the number advantage, but that isn't always the good thing. With that, Juan sends in his next Pokemon, his Kingdra. James looks at the Pokemon. He knows this Pokemon, a water dragon type. This is not going to be easy. James takes a minute to think to himself, what do I have that I can use against this? This is not going to be good. Cacnea and Masquerain are both tired, and Zangoose has been taken out. All I have left is just Dusclops, Medicham, and Aggron. Aggron has a type disadvantage. Medicham and Dusclops both may be strong enough to take it out, but it will be close. With that, James makes his decision after a little bit of pressure from Juan, telling him that if he doesn't make one soon, then he would be disqualified. James grabs a ball, and he throws in his next Pokemon, Medicham. Medicham is James's best bet at this point, and it does prove so, because Kingdra is very aggressive, firing Twisters, Dragon Rages, and Hydro Pumps, trying to engulf Medicham, but James is prepared for this, and Medicham is as well, as it uses its psychic powers to deflect each one and push it back. Although, as it uses its psychic powers and pushing it back, catching Kingdra in some of them, but it is unable to deflect all of them, and it does get caught in some of them itself. The two Pokemon push hard, but unfortunately, in the end, Medicham eventually falls. James is now down to 3 Pokemon, and he thinks, I don't really have a choice here. I have to go with someone, but I need to save my fresh one for last. So, he sends back in Cacnea. The battle between Cacnea and Kingdra gets underway, and Juan's strategy is still the same with Kingdra, try and engulf the field with Dragon Rage and Twister. But luckily for James, Cacnea is able to mostly dodge these, and it's able to get in with a couple of pin missiles and a Needle Arm, causing severe damage to Kingdra. Then comes the point to where James orders Cacnea to jump up in the air and try to fire a pin missile. Juan sees this as a chance, and he orders a Hydro Pump. As Kingdra fires it towards Cacnea, James orders Cacnea to use its momentum and to lean back. This causes Cacnea to roll, and with the rolling, James uses the momentum to fire a pin missile from a distance, hitting Kingdra, knocking it out. Cacnea then lands and is extremely out of breath. This battle was intense, and it pushed the little cactus Pokemon to the limit. Juan commemorates James and Cacnea on a battle well fought. He didn't think that this little cactus was going to be able to go the distance, but it did. And as Juan is giving Cacnea its praise, Cacnea starts to glow. James looks at Cacnea. He can't believe it. Is this really happening? And with that, James now has a new Cacturn. Cacturn looks back at James. It's ready to continue to battle. James asks it if it wants to stay in, and Cacturn nods, and he is in full agreement with this. But this doesn't come up without a cost. Even though it's evolved, Cacturn still has taken a lot of damage and it is exhausted. James knows that it's exhausted, and unfortunately it may not make it through the next battle, but James is going to do his best to push through. With that, Juan sends in his final Pokemon, Milotic. James has never faced a Pokemon like this before, and the way it moves in the water and the way it fires attacks catches James off guard. Though Cacturn has grown in power, it's only able to deflect a couple attacks. It does get a pin missile in that does hit Milotic, but unfortunately, it's not enough to put the Pokemon down, and Cacturn eventually falls to a Twister. James recalls Cac. He thanks it for all of its hard work. He can't believe that it evolved just so he could help James get through this gym badge, but he has no time to reminisce on this. He has to send in his next Pokemon. So with that, he clutches the ball in his hand and he sends back in Masquerain. Masquerain is ready to battle. This Pokemon, even though it did take a lot of damage in its first double battle, it's still moving around like it hasn't taken any damage at all. But James doesn't know how long it can keep this up. The battle between Masquerain and Milotic get underway, and because Masquerain stays at a distance, Milotic really can't reach it with its Twisters and its Hydro Pumps. But it does get caught in a Silver Wind, and this Silver Wind seems to be having effects on Masquerain, because Masquerain seems to be getting faster, and every attack it launches seems to be getting stronger. So James decides to go with this strategy and just keeps ordering Masquerain to fire Silver Wind after Silver Wind, and it works. Eventually, over time, the little bug Pokemon is able to push back one of the Twisters, catching Milotic in it, causing it some damage. This is when Juan reveals its trump card. He calls for a recovering some of the damage that Milotic had taken. James thinks, this is bad. How am I going to get out of this? Masquerain is beginning to show signs of fatigue. Its stats are up, but he doesn't know how much longer it can take. With that, James orders one desperate attempt and orders Masquerain to fire another gust. The gust speeds towards Milotic, but Milotic pushes through with the Hydro Pump, catching Masquerain as it was unable to dodge due to its fatigue, knocking it out. James is down to his last Pokemon, but Milotic is starting to show signs of fatigue, even though it does have recovery. James needs something powerful. He needs something that can put a lot of damage on the field, and he only has one Pokemon that can do that. With no other options, James makes a choice that he hopes that he doesn't regret, and he sends in Aggron. As Aggron emerges from the ball, it roars, trying to intimidate its opponent. Juan at this moment thinks James has begun to crack under the pressure. Why would you send out a rock type to face a water type? Are you out of your mind? He thinks to himself, but he has no time for that. He aims to end this battle now, as James is down to his final Pokemon. So the battle gets underway, but unfortunately for Juan, James's Aggron is proven to be way more formidable. At a point when Aggron catches Milotic's tail when it tries to fire a twister towards it, Juan orders Milotic to pull it underwater, thinking that that would be enough to put Aggron down. But unfortunately, when Aggron gets underwater, it uses the force of Milotic pulling it in to hit it with a double edge at James's order, and this causes a lot of damage. Juan is caught off guard. He's thinking to himself, what is going on here? Why is this Aggron in the water? And not only that, but Aggron seems to be swimming as well. James tells Juan this was his plan. Even though Aggron is weak against water, his Aggron, for some reason, has the ability to swim. I guess it comes from the fact that I had caught it on Dewford Island, a place surrounded by water. Juan thinks to himself, maybe this kid isn't so crazy at all. So he has to step up his game. Once Aggron gets it back on land, Juan orders Milotic to fire a Hydro Pump at Aggron, hoping to push it back and to end this. James wants to end this as well, and he orders Aggron to take the Hydro Pump straight to its head, rushing in with Double Edge. Aggron does so, and it rushes towards Milotic as fast as it can, and with all of its might, it pushes off the land part of the battlefield, heading straight for Milotic. And as it comes clashing down, James wants to use the weight of Aggron to increase one of its best attacks, Iron Tail. And as James calls for Iron Tail, Aggron's tail connects with Milotic's head, slamming into it with full force and the full weight of Aggron behind it, knocking out Milotic and earning James his 8th and final badge for the Hoenn region. James is super ecstatic. He can't believe that he was able to do it. Even though he kind of doubted the strategy with going with Aggron, proved to be successful. James can't wait for his chance to challenge the Lily of the Valley Conference. And as Juan gives him the rain badge, Juan tells James that he hasn't been that impressed since he battled a young trainer by the name of Ash. And with that, he also tells James that he might want to consider his future as a coordinator, as his ability to use techniques in combination could bring him great success in the Grand Festival. And with that, James parts ways with the Sootopolis gym, and he heads back to the Mount Chimney base for Team Rocket. Once Jessie gets back to the Mount Chimney base, James is there waiting for her. The two gleefully greet each other and start to show off their badges, both signifying that they have earned 8 badges each and can enter the Lily of the Valley Conference. But their celebration is short-lived as they're met by Meowth. Meowth has been very busy building up the base and trying to track down Butch and Cassidy, but he has bad news. He's been unable to gather the whereabouts of Butch and Cassidy. Now that they're fugitives of Team Rocket, they're doing their best to lay low as not to grab attention from anybody, but he's still going to continue to work diligently. Domino, on the other hand, does have some information for them. She tells them that after talking with Giovanni wants them to return to Kanto as soon as possible, as he has another mission for them. Jessie and James look at each other. Then they look at Domino with a look of fear on their faces. Domino says, "Don't worry." He said, "As soon as you're done with your mission out here." Jessie and James says, "What do you mean?" Domino says, "Well, I kind of told him that you guys were rounding up the last of the admins of Team Aqua and Team Magma, so I've bought you a little bit of time." Jessie and James's face immediately turned from fear to relief. They're going to get the opportunity to challenge the Lily of the Valley Conference. After spending a few days at the Mount Chimney base getting ready for the conference, Jessie and James also wanted to spend some time with their Pokemon that they're not going to be able to use. But they eventually have to part ways, and they head off to Evergrande City. Once they arrive at Evergrande City, they register for the championships. Now, this is where things get a little interesting. In the original canon, Jessie and James weren't there to battle. They were there serving concessions in the stands. Now, I'm not going to draw this out into a super long, super detailed event, as this video has become long enough as it is. But I will tell you here that James has had more training than Jessie. So I feel like Jessie would make it to the top 32 and lose in round 3. And the reason that she would lose is because of X-Cloud. Unfortunately, because she still hasn't tamed it, in a moment of desperation, trying to use it in a 3 out of 3, it wouldn't listen to her, and unfortunately, she would end up having to recall it, forfeiting the match. James, on the other hand, I think he would make it to the first 6-on-6 battle, and there, unfortunately, I think he would lose due to his opponent being more experienced than him, and his opponent being the one who would eventually go on to win the league, Tyson. Now, there are a couple of things that would change here, and that I would want to specify, and that's predominantly with Ash's team. So Ash still would catch all the same Pokemon that he normally does, with a couple of differences. First things first, I do think that Pikachu and Swellow's development would still be the same, but Grovyle would be a little bit weaker here, as well as Corphish and Torkoal. And then there's one major change. Because Team Rocket wasn't there to try and attack Snorunt at the Grand Festival, I don't think it would be evolved. So Ash's core team would be a lot weaker here, and as a result, I don't think Ash would make it past the top 16, and he would actually end up losing to Morrison, because in the original, his Glalie was strong enough to take out the Metang. But in this version, because Snorunt never evolved, Glalie ends up losing to Metang. And then at that point, Morrison would go on to the top 8 and end up losing to Tyson, and Tyson would go on to win the whole league. With that being said, Jessie and James, after their adventures in the Lily of the Valley Conference come to an end, would get intel from Meowth, saying that Butch and Cassidy were spotted back in the Kanto region, and they, too, have decided to head back because they have some unfinished business with the duo. And I believe that during Ash's trek through the Battle Frontier, their time would be spent tracking down Butch and Cassidy to retrieve their lost Pokeballs. With minimum success, they would eventually get one ball each. Jessie would get Nummels, and James would get Breloom's, but that would still leave Arbok and Weezing's balls to get. And with Ash concluding the Battle Frontier, and Jessie and James now back at the Team Rocket base, Giovanni has ordered them to pay their price. So unfortunately, they're going to have to forfeit some of their Pokemon that they captured in Hoenn here. Giovanni, of course, would want to take the strongest. So I feel like James, unfortunately, would end up losing his Aggron, his Zangoose, and his Medicham to Giovanni, while Jessie would end up losing her Absol, her Claydol, and Seviper to Giovanni, just because they are the strongest members of their team. He still allows them to keep 3 core members, as they're going to need them, because rumor has it that another team has popped up in a region up north, and Jessie and James were given orders to head north to infiltrate and take down this new team. So with that and the unfortunate events of having to give up some of their prized Pokemon, Jessie and James make the choice to head to the Sinnoh region. If you enjoyed the video, please drop a like for the YouTube algorithm. Also, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to interact more with me, don't forget to join the Discord and follow me on Twitter. And if you want to support me any further, head over to my Patreon. Just $5 a month gets you 1 week early access to all of my videos. These awesome people have already donated, so I can continue to bring you the content that you love. The links for all of these are in the description below. Anyway, I'm Ronan Charizard, and I'll see you in the next video.